This happened in 2017, when I was working as a technician at a private research facility outside of Duluth, Minnesota. The building looked pretty ordinary from the outside. It was much older than it appeared, though. Over decades, they had added sections and renovated parts of it, and one of the strangest features is what was beneath it. The building had 2 sub-level basements. Most employees only ever went down to the first one, which held storage rooms, electrical panels, and mechanical equipment. My job, however, involved maintaining a very specific piece of lab machinery that had been installed in sub-basement 2, the lowest level of the building. Almost no one ever went down there. The hallway was narrow and the ceiling was crowded with pipes, and the fluorescent light hummed constantly. It was quite annoying, actually, the noise. Access to that room was restricted because the equipment was so expensive and sensitive, and I had the only physical key to the lab. Even my supervisor had to call me if anything needed to be checked. Inside the room was a machine I maintained, a metal desk, a few cabinets, and an old wired landline phone bolted to the wall. It was there in case someone working late underground couldn't get cell reception and needed to call for help. I used to stay late pretty often, but not that night. That evening, I finished work around 6 and drove back to my apartment on the other side of town, roughly 10 miles away. I remember eating dinner, watching TV for a while, and eventually falling asleep somewhere before midnight. But a few hours later, I woke up to my phone ringing. The screen said it was my girlfriend Maya, and I answered groggily. She was crying. She could barely get words out. "Why did you do that? Why did you scare me like that?" I sat up in bed confused. What are you talking about?" Between sobs, she finally explained. A minute earlier, she had received a call from a number she didn't recognize. Since it was late, she almost ignored it, but part of her thought I could be calling from work. And when she answered, she said there was silence at first, and then a slow, quiet voice repeating her name. "Maya, Maya." She said the voice sounded just like mine, but the tone was flat and drawn out, and there was this constant crackling in the background. She kept asking where I was and what I was doing, but the voice just kept saying her name over and over. Eventually, the line started breaking apart in bursts of static until it faded out completely, and that's when she called me. At first, I assumed it was a prank call or some strange glitch, but then she told me the number that had called her. It looked strangely familiar, and I asked her to send me a screenshot on her call log. When it came through, the number listed was that of the landline in sub-basement 2. Remember, the phone is inside the locked lab, which only I have a key to. I told her it must be just a glitch with the phone system, but she kept insisting the voice sounded like me. Next morning, of course, I went early into work and went straight downstairs to investigate, but everything looked normal. The lab door was untampered. Everything was locked up, and nothing appeared disturbed, and the phone hung on the wall the way it always had. Out of curiosity, I picked up the receiver and checked the redial function. The last outgoing call had been placed at 4:17 a.m. to my girlfriend's number. I don't have an explanation to this, but the part that has always bothered me the most is that if someone really made the call from the lab, they would have been alone in a locked room in the lowest level of the basement in the middle of the night, with no way to escape. When I was a kid, my family and I went for a walk on the beach during midwinter. Halfway through the walk, it started blizzarding fiercely, and we decided to head back to the car. On the way back to the car park, my brothers and I were complaining of being tired, hungry, and thirsty. But my dad, who was born and raised in the area, assured us there was nowhere to buy food and drink anywhere near that particular beach. However, as we battered through the whiteout towards the car park, a building loomed out of the blizzard. It was a strange building, like an annex to a 60s/70s modern comprehensive school. People from the UK will know what style I mean, and squeezed in between 4 hedgerows atop the spine of a long flat sand dune, as though it was there first and the ancient haggard hedges had somehow grown up around it. Outside was a sandwich board advertising hot drinks and snacks, so we bundled in. The place was packed. There must have been 4 or 5 dozen tables, and every single one was heaving with pensioners eating tea, toast, tea cakes, and soup. When we arrived, there were no other cars in the car park, and the nearest bus stop in the village was at the end of the track a good few miles away, so goodness knows where all these old people had come from. The room itself was very strange. The tables and chairs were all mismatched and arranged around glass display cases on podiums filled with mouldering taxidermied specimens of local wildlife, except many of the examples were either creatures who lived nowhere near the area, like hedgehogs, badgers, or voles, or animals that aren't native or, at any rate, very rare to the area, cormorants, avocates, and plovers, etc. At the centre of the room was a squared-off spiral staircase leading to the upstairs, which, despite having no curtain visible from the outside and being in the middle of the day in a bright white snowstorm, was pitch dark. I mean so dark, we couldn't even see the top of the staircase banister. We sat down and my dad went off to get us some food. The oddest thing is that even at that age I remember looking at the prices on the walls and being very confused because they were all in old money, with prices in halfpennies, sixpence and shillings. It was an open pass kitchen and all the equipment behind it looked very retro, as did all the clothes of the women happily working behind the counter. When my dad came back with the food, he couldn't stop talking about how amazingly cheap it was, and how the woman who served him spoke to him using ultra-specific regional dialect terms he thought had completely died out decades ago. He said it was like being a schoolboy at the tuck shop again. We ate our very generous and very delicious tea cakes and hot chocolate, and got our coats, hats, gloves, scarves, and walked back out into the still raging blizzard. The whole time we were there, not a single other person entered or left, despite many tables clearly having finished eating before we'd even arrived. We battled back to the car, and with much difficulty maneuvered it back onto the track to the main road and head home. In the years to come, we visited that beach many, many times again. The building, though, was never there. Not only was it not there were no signs that it had ever been there. No rubble, no ruin, no foundation, not even the ancient-looking hedges that it seemed to have squeezed itself inside of. Due to the beach being jutting out into a major shipping channel, the area has been fastidiously mapped for centuries. Using my student historical archive access, I studied maps of the area from roughly every decade right back to the early 19th century, and according to them, there was never any building on that site. Now it's easy to think as I've grown older, I've become confused as to which beach we visited. But as I said before, my dad, who was born and raised there, knew exactly which beach we were on. And the beach itself is very, very distinctive. A very thin, long, teardrop split of sand extending across a river estuary mouth. I know it must have been that beach, because I remember seeing the red warning beacon at the top of the suspension bridge crossing the estuary blinking throughout the blizzard. The place didn't exist, had never existed. I ate tea cakes and drank hot chocolate with my family, in a place that simply never was there. In 2003, shortly after I started teaching computer lab as a block class, I was standing in my doorway talking with a very gifted third grade student, as we often did. That day's topic was really long words. I told him about one I learned at a fairly young age, anti-disestablishmentarianism. He was fascinated and asked what it meant, so we spent some time breaking down the word into its prefixes and suffixes, root word, etc. to get to the meaning. By this time my next class was arriving, so he said goodbye and went on his way. As the next class sat down, I gave them their first instruction, which involved navigating to the school website. Well, This was that time in internet history where some people/organizations and corporations were buying up similar websites with different domain suffixes, so if you accidentally typed in, for example, instead of .com, .net, instead of a dead page or error, you got a completely different website that you expected, now owned by these often unscrupulous people. For example, during this time, if you were to go to whitehouse.com instead of .gov, you would go to a rather interesting site that under 18s definitely shouldn't have accessed. Other sites were less malicious, just ad sites, offering the option to buy the domain you typed in. But back to the kids. And as always happened, one kid accidentally typed in a .com instead of a .net on the web search for the school district. This had happened before, and our district was one of those that resulted in an ad website listing similar domains and their availability. But today was a little different. I looked at the student screen, and before I could correct the address, I did a double take. There on the screen was the exact transcript of the conversation I'd just had with my third grader. And when I say exact, I mean word for word, including all the ums and ahs and you knows. Internally, I kind of freaked out. Didn't show it outwardly, but I immediately changed the website to the school district, like I needed to get it off the screen as quickly as humanly possible. Then I had a minute to think it over. So I went back to that student's computer and went back to the .com address to see it again. Only just as quickly it was gone. It made me regret not having the forethought to grab one of our digital cameras and take a picture. To this day, I still have no idea how it happened, but I've always had the feeling I got a peek behind a curtain we don't even know exists. Back in 2011, when we were all around 16, my friend Dylan lived outside a small farm town near Ashland, Wisconsin. His family owned a few acres surrounded by empty fields and thick lines of pine trees. Behind their house sat an old hunting cabin then converted into our weekend hangout spot. It wasn't really a cabin anymore. Dylan's dad had fixed it up with electricity, a small wood stove, a fridge, a TV hooked up to an old game console, and 4 sets of bunk beds stacked along the walls. We basically treated it like our own clubhouse. Every Friday night, we'd pile in there, play games, eat junk food, and stay up late. Well, one night late in October, a few of us were hanging out in the cabin while the wind rattled the trees outside, and it was already dark. At some point I realized I had to pee. The bathroom in Dylan's house was technically closer, but none of us ever bothered walking inside. I pushed open the cabin door and stepped out into the cold. To explain the layout, when you walked out of the cabin, the house sat off to the left about 30 yards away. That area was lit by a porch light and a motion light over the driveway. To the right, we always parked our cars along the edge of a gravel strip. Past the cars was nothing but an open field that eventually faded into a line of trees. The porch light from the house lit the space between the cabin and the cars pretty well, but just past the last vehicle, the light dropped off sharply into the darkness. I stepped out and started walking to the right, planning to go behind the cars where it was darker. And that's where I stopped. Standing next to the last car was Dylan's older brother Marcus, just staring. Marcus was about 20 at the time, and sometimes hung out with us for a bit before going back into the house. I figured he must have stepped out for some air, but something about the way he stood there made me pause. He wasn't looking towards the cabin or the house, but the field, just staring straight into the darkness beyond the cars. The wind moved through the trees, and when I moved towards him, Marcus didn't react at all or acknowledge me. And I stood there for a moment watching him, and watching what he was watching. Then he began walking. Slowly he moved past the cars. For a moment the porch light hit him clearly. He was wearing a grey hoodie and black jeans, with his hands stuffed into his pockets. I remember that detail specifically because it stuck with me later. He continued walking until he reached a couple of thin trees near the edge of the light. Then he stepped behind them and was eaten away by darkness. I figured he'd just gone further out into the field. Maybe it was to smoke something. It felt a little weird that he hadn't said anything though, but whatever. I took care of my business quickly and went back to the cabin. Everyone was still there, sitting around the table playing cards, and Dylan was dealing. Marcus was sitting a few feet away in a folding chair sipping a drink. For a moment, my brain couldn't process it. I looked at him and back at Dylan. "Hey, what's your brother doing out by the cars?" Dylan looked up. "What do you mean?" "I just saw him out there. He walked past the cars towards the field." "Dude, I've been in here," Marcus said. I laughed awkwardly, thinking he was messing with me. No, you weren't. I literally just saw you in grey hoodie and black jeans." Marcus slowly lifted his arm and looked down at himself. He was wearing a grey hoodie and black jeans. A couple of the guys started joking about it, but I suddenly felt this tight feeling in my stomach. "There's no back door," I said. "The only way in here is through the door I just came through, right?" As I had been standing in the doorway the whole time after coming back in. Marcus hadn't walked past me, he hadn't come behind me, and no one had opened the door since I returned. Everyone went quiet for a few moments, and then Dylan finally said, "You're screwing with us, right?" But I wasn't. The thing that still bothers me isn't just that I saw someone who looked exactly like Marcus, is that I was staring at him for a good 10 seconds. I don't really know what to make of all of this. This is something a close friend of mine told me years ago, and it's always stuck with me. It happened to his uncle when he was a kid around 10 years old, in a very small rural town in Australia. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. There were no traffic lights or supermarkets, and barely any paved roads for that matter. Just houses, farmlands, and long stretches of empty highway. Having a car in that town was a luxury. Only a handful of people owned one, and because of that everyone knew whose car was whose. You could recognize them from a distance. One of those cars belonged to a man who used it every morning to drive to work. His route took him along a long, straight highway, more like a rural route than a proper road, cutting through open land. It wasn't completely deserted, but traffic was light, especially early in the morning. One day, like always, he left his house at 5 a.m. Nothing unusual happened. There was no strange behavior or indication that anything was wrong. He just got in his car and drove off. And at 7 a.m. his wife received a phone call. The person on the other end told her her husband's car had been found on the side of the highway, the engine still running, doors closed, keys still in the ignition, but there was no sign of her husband. At first, people assumed there must be a logical explanation. Maybe he stepped away for help, maybe there was an incident nearby, but none of it added up. There were no skid marks, no damage to the car, no footprints leading away from it. And abandoning a running car like that made no sense, especially in a place where cars were rare and valuable. Before she could even process the call, she received another one. This time, she was told her husband had been found alive in another city. The city was roughly 960 kilometers away from where the car was discovered. He had been found wandering completely naked, confused and dehydrated, and barely able to speak. Authorities said he appeared disoriented, as if he had no idea where he was or how he got there. If you've ever driven long distances, you'll immediately understand how impossible this sounds. Even today, with modern highways and cars, that trip would take at least 9 hours of non-stop driving. Back then, with older vehicles and rougher roads, it would have taken much longer. There were no records of him buying fuel, no bus tickets, no witnesses who remembered giving him a ride, and flying wasn't an option as commercial flights weren't accessible from that town, and even if they were, the cost alone would have ruled it out. How did he get there then? That was the question that haunted everyone. His wife used the same car, the one found abandoned and still functioning, to go and retrieve him. When she finally saw him, she said he looked like a different person, like something fundamental inside him had snapped. People tried asking him what happened, but he never answered. He refused to talk about the road, the time in between, or how he ended up hundreds of kilometers away. Any attempt to bring it up would cause him to panic or shut down completely. Over time, his mental state deteriorated. He became paranoid, withdrawn, and eventually lost touch with reality altogether and was committed to a psychiatric hospital. According to my friend, his uncle never spoke about that morning again, not to anyone. What gets me isn't just the distance or the time gap, it's the car left running, as if he had stepped out for just a second and never stepped back in. Almost like reality skipped him. I don't know if this was a glitch, missing time, or something else entirely, but every time I think about that empty car on the Australian highway still humming to itself in the early morning light, I get chills, and I can't help but wonder where he really went during those missing hours. This happened in my late 30s, and it's the creepiest experience I still can't explain. My husband, kids, and I were in the living room just hanging out watching TV and talking. I was sitting on the sofa, and something I can't remember what exactly fell off, so I went to pick it up. But as soon as I bent over, my foot touched the ground, and my hand was on the object. All three things were done at the exact same time. I was no longer in my living room or myself. I was stepping off a street curb, basically in the exact same position in what looked like a big city in the 20s or 30s. I looked down at myself, and from what I saw, I must have been a man, because I had on a suit with a long coat and expensive shoes and a hat. I have to dig up my journal because I wrote it all down, but I think I remember seeing this person's reflection in the water by the curb or a car's window. It's been a while, and it only lasted a few seconds. It felt like what broke the connection or whatever was when I stood up and I was back in my house. The thing is though, it was so vivid, so detailed. I could hear everything and it felt like I was there. I can still see it in my memory. I know this is absolutely impossible and makes no sense, but this is one of the creepiest things I have ever experienced. This happened in 2018, when I was staying over at my girlfriend Lena's parents' house outside of Boise, Idaho. We were in her living room watching TV, when I suddenly started feeling really nauseous and lightheaded. It hit me out of nowhere. One minute I felt fine, and the next I felt like I might pass out. Lena walked me into the kitchen so I could get some water. I remember leaning back against the counter while she hugged me, asking if I was okay. Then she pulled back and stared at me with a terrified look. She said my face had gone completely pale, almost grey, and kept touching my cheeks, saying my lips were turning purple. And that's when I noticed something strange. I couldn't feel my heart. I told her so. I reached up to check my pulse on my neck, and then everything went black. But instead of losing consciousness, I found myself elsewhere. I can't really describe it properly. It wasn't a room, nor was it outside. It was an empty space. But somehow I was standing and walking normally, and I wasn't alone. There were other people there with me. They looked like normal people, of different ages wearing different clothes, and I could see their faces clearly. And they could see me too. No one spoke. We were just standing there in silence. Then in the distance, this bright bluish-white light appeared. It started faint, but quickly became incredibly bright, and somehow we all seemed to understand the same thing at the same time. We were supposed to walk towards it, and that we did. The closer we got, the more peaceful everything felt. I've never felt calm like that before. It was like every worry and fear I'd ever had just vanished. I remember thinking the light was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. And then suddenly, something yanked me back hard. It was like something hooked me from behind and was dragging me away. The peaceful feeling disappeared instantly, and I felt this intense pulling sensation. The light started getting further away, and as I was pulled back I could hear a noise like static in the faint distance, which turned into a scream. And it was that moment the light vanished completely and I woke up on the kitchen floor. Lena's mum was doing CPR on me. She's a nurse and had apparently run in when she started screaming. Lena was in hysterics next to us. The scream I heard while being pulled away was from her. Apparently what happened was that right after I said I can't feel my heart, I passed out and fell onto her. She couldn't hold me up, so I hit the counter on my way down and crashed into some empty bottles on the floor. Her mum couldn't find her pulse, and after about a minute of CPR I came back. The weird part is that Lena told me that while I was unconscious, I was completely still but smiling. Then right before I stopped breathing, their 3 cats absolutely freaked out. They started hissing and howling and sprinting to the back door like something had scared them badly. One came back the next morning, but the other 2 were found later up a tree a few blocks away. At the hospital they ran a bunch of tests, and everything came back completely normal and the doctors couldn't explain what caused it. The reason I've always thought this more of a glitch than a near-death experience is one specific detail. When I first arrived in the empty place with the other people, they all looked at me for a moment, sort of confused, like I had shown up somewhere I wasn't supposed to be, only for me, of course, to then be pulled back. It all happened on my birthday, during a mountain bike race weekend. I was a 16-year-old male, and my friend, who was the same age, had gone out of town for a mountain bike race weekend. These races usually last 2 days. The first day is practice to learn the course. The second is the actual race. After practice, the 2 of us decided to grab some ice cream. About halfway through mine, I suddenly needed to use the restroom. The shop didn't have one, so I told my friend I'd check the hotel next door. It was a little strip mall, and it was around 5:30 in the afternoon. He followed. As soon as we stepped inside, the place felt strange. The air smelled musty, like an old carpet, and there was absolutely no one around. We couldn't see any workers or guests. On the front counter sat one of those little gold-waving cat statues. Its paw clicked rhythmically as it moved up and down, and that sound echoed through the empty lobby. That was it. We wandered for a little, asking to use the bathroom, but the place seemed abandoned. Finally, I gave up and started searching on my own. I noticed a restroom sign swaying slightly under one of the lights. I looked at my friend and said, "Well, looks like it's this way." He sat down on the couch on the lobby, and I walked down the hall. The buzzing lights overhead made the whole corridor feel lonelier the further I went. At the end, instead of restroom doors, I found a ballroom completely empty, except for music equipment on the stage. The floor had scattered lights shining on it, as if a party had just frozen in place, and overhead hung a static disco ball, its surface reflecting lights, but the beams didn't move. I looked around trying to find where the beams of light were coming from, but couldn't see the source. The whole scene felt frozen and unreal. When I turned to leave, I noticed something strange. A doorway leading into what looked like an Indian restaurant, but to the right, another set of open doors stood wide. Curiosity pulled me in, and the moment I stepped through, the smell hit me. It was sharp and chemical and unmistakably chlorine. But it wasn't the usual faint pool smell. It was strong, almost like choking or standing over an open bottle of cleaner fluid. Inside was an indoor pool that was perfectly still. The water was murky, its surface flat and untouched, reflecting the odd glow of 4 harsh lights in each corner of the room. The shadows they cast stretched unnaturally across the walls, blending and warping the space, until it didn't even feel like a real pool room anymore. Around the water, sun chairs sat in neat rows. They looked like they hadn't been touched in years, coated in a thin film of dust. The walls themselves were strange wood, like the fronts of little shops. The longer I stood there, the weirder I felt. It was like the chlorine-soaked air was pressing down my chest. Finally, I turned back. To the left was the ballroom I had just come from, but straight ahead the doorway into the Indian restaurant waited, so I chose that path instead. Curious, I walked in, figuring maybe that's where the bathrooms were. The red carpet crunched under my shoes like it hadn't been stepped on in years, and as soon as I stepped inside, I heard faint Indian music playing. It was soft and warped, almost like it was coming from a broken record machine. I couldn't tell where specifically it had come from. It added another layer to the strange, frozen feeling of that place. The restaurant only had booths around the edges and no tables or chairs in the middle, which I thought was weird. I circled the room, taking it all in. When I looked back towards the bar, I saw something I swear had not been there earlier. A hallway with a glowing sign that read "Bathrooms this way." I followed it and finally found the restaurant. As I walked, I thought about how perfect this place was for pictures. I love liminal spaces, and this was exactly the kind of eerie place that fascinates me. The restroom itself was nothing special. The light was dim, the mirror was cracked, and the paper towel dispenser hung crooked. I washed my hands and pushed the door open, ready to leave. The instant I opened it, the whole world shifted. I was hit with the smell of curry, strong and rich, like someone had just set a steaming dish in front of me, and at the same time I heard it, the sound of plates clinking, forks tapping against porcelain, and dozens of voices overlapping in chatter and laughter. The empty air I had walked through minutes earlier was suddenly alive with noise. My stomach dropped. I stepped in the hallway, and when I looked back into the restaurant, it was not the abandoned place I had entered anymore. Families sat in the booths, children laughing, eating naan, and the bar was packed with men talking to each other. Waiters weaved quickly between tables that had not even been there moments before. It just didn't make sense. Moments earlier, this place had looked forgotten, like no one had been here in years. Now it was warm and alive and full of energy. I couldn't explain it. Then my phone buzzed. It was my friend. "Bro, what's taking so long? I'm just about to leave you." I didn't even answer. I just wanted to get back. When I stepped back into the hallway, I glanced towards the pool room I'd seen earlier. My chest tightened when I realized it was no longer abandoned. The once murky water now rippled with movement as people splashed and shouted, their laughter bouncing sharply off the tiled walls. Trying to act normal, I left the restaurant and walked back towards the lobby. But when I stepped out, my stomach twisted even harder. It was dark outside. My friend was still standing by the couch, but he didn't just look annoyed, he looked terrified. His face was pale, his hands were shaking a little, and his eyes darted to me like he didn't believe what he was seeing. "Bro," he said in a voice. "Where the hell did you run off to? I was about to call the police. I blew up your phone. I called you like 10 times and you never answered. I even went looking for you, man. Where were you?" I don't know," I stammered, and I really didn't. The strangest part, now the lobby was not empty, people walked around with suitcases. The TV in the corner was playing news, and the woman at the front desk was smiling, receiving the newcomers. We walked out together, and I pulled out my phone to check the time. It was 8:50. Now I swear I had only been in there for maybe 5 minutes. I thought about taking pictures, but I could not. And after how strange it all felt, the restaurant changing, the time disappearing, my friend nearly calling the police because I had vanished, I didn't want to stick around. When I stepped into my car, I sat there for a while. The only light was the small overhead mirror light inside the car. And I looked through the glass doors of the hotel one last time, and noticed the little gold cat was gone. The drive back to our hotel was quiet and unsettling. I was so distracted by everything that had happened that I almost ran a red light. My heart was racing and I've never felt so confused. My friend barely spoke the entire way back. When we arrived, my parents were in our hotel room at a different location. My mum saw me and frowned. "What's wrong?" she asked. Her voice was soft but serious. "Nothing," I said quickly. "Just really tired from practice." I went straight to the shower and crawled into bed. But even lying there in the dark, I still don't know what really happened to me. The whole thing really creeped me out. Does anyone have an explanation for this? This happened back in 2010, when I was 15. I was on a family vacation where we visited the Biltmore Estate in North Carolina. There were 11 of us on the trip, including my parents, my sister, my aunt, and her husband, and 3 kids and my grandparents. The estate was not where the incident in question happened, however. On our way home to the Biltmore, the adults decided it would be fun to visit the Omni Grove Park Inn. On the way, they told us that the hotel was haunted, so of course we were intrigued. When we arrived, the kids split off to explore the hotel and look for ghosts. We were running around taking pictures with our phones, trying to capture images of ghosts or orbs. Overall, things were uneventful, until we got the call to meet back in the lobby before we started the drive home. By this point, my cousins, my sister and I had all split into different groups, and I found myself with my cousin of 11, Jay. Jay and I somehow ended up on the 4th floor. We were on the balcony and could see our family down in the lobby, but our grandfather was not with them. He just so happened to be on the same floor as us. He was waiting by the elevator with a bunch of other people, and we wanted to take the stairs down instead of waiting for the next elevator. Our grandfather decided to follow us. Now this was an open staircase that went directly down into the lobby. We were on the 4th floor, so we expected to come down at least 3 flights of stairs. This is where things started getting freaky. The stairs kept continuing after 3 flights. It felt like 10 minutes of continuously walking down the stairs, and not only were Jay and I confused, but our grandfather was furious. He was tired after the first minute of stairs, and now he was yelling at Jay and I like we were pulling something over him and making him walk down more stairs. The whole time it seemed like the rest of the hotel around us became blurry or smoky. It was surreal. Once we made it to the bottom of the stairs and into the lobby, we thought we were going to be in trouble for taking so long, but everyone acted like it hadn't been long at all. Our grandfather seemed completely different too. He wasn't angry anymore, nor was he tired. Jay and I spoke for a while on the car ride home, and he seemed to feel the same way. That the stairs kept on going and that the surroundings became blurry. Was it supernatural? A glitch in the Matrix? To this day, I'm still not sure what happened that evening at the Omni Grove Park Inn. I was about 6. Every time my best friend slept over, it would happen. I've tried to explain it away as a recurring nightmare, but there's just no way. To this day, my dreams don't make any sense. People, places, and things all look different in my dreams. It's very clearly not reality. But this dream was perfect. I would be in my room. Every detail would be exactly the same. The teddy bear wallpaper, my knickknacks, everything. I'd wake up in the middle of the night in my room. It would be dark. I'd look around and notice the shadows on the walls looked like shadows of forest animals. I'd try to figure out what objects in my room were making these perfect shadows, and as soon as I'd come to the realization, there was nothing in the room that could possibly cast these shadows on the wall, and they would slowly blink, opening their glowing red eyes. Then they'd peel off the wall like you'd peel a sticker label off a box. They'd hop off the wall and run over to me to kick and bite me. I could never remember how it ended. I'd just wake up the next morning. I don't know why, but I never told my parents about it. It happened so many times, but I never told anyone. I was young, so I didn't have the idea to check for bruises the next day, but I was a clumsy kid, so I was covered in them anyway. I don't experience sleep paralysis, but I do occasionally wake up in the hypnopompic state to see a giant shadow spider crawling across my pillow, and that's terrifying. A few years ago, my then 2-year-old son woke up screaming from his nap. This was normal for him, by the way. He had a very limited vocabulary at this point, but he managed to describe sleep paralysis complete with Hat Man to me. There's no way he could have known about the Hat Man at that age. But he told me about him. That was the proof I needed. Shadow entities are real. I've heard that they haunt generations of families. Well, as I was explaining his experience, and my childhood experience to my mum, she admitted to me that she sees shadow people occasionally. And that's it. I'm a believer for life. In April, I was in a traumatic rollover accident. I'm lucky I escaped without a scratch. It was the scariest thing to ever happen to me. However, when I went back to work, immediately, I know I shouldn't have, I was having what felt like timeline jumps. It felt like I was fighting to stay on my current timeline. I was losing moments of time here and there. One day, my coworker and I were merchandising and cleaning displays. We were literally talking to each other back and forth. I asked her a question and it was silent. I thought, wow, how rude. I looked around and she wasn't even there, though we were in the middle of a conversation. So I thought maybe she decided to take a break and go to the back room, since she wasn't in the lobby or bent down behind the counters. I checked the bathroom, but they were empty. So I went back to doing what I was doing. Then 15 minutes went by, and she still wasn't in the room. So I shout her name as loud as I can, and then she's calmly like, "I'm right here, why are you yelling for me?" I screamed because I was startled. I started having a panic attack and crying because she said that we were talking and she had been in the room the entire time. I said she wasn't. I told her I went to ask her a question and she had just vanished. I was so freaked out I felt insane, but she believed me. My coworker and I could not explain it. She was my passenger in the car when the accident happened too. After going to the doctor, it turned out I had a concussion, but all my scans and everything else was clear and normal. I had a CT as well as an MRI, and this only occurred in the first 3 weeks and hasn't happened since. I used to work at a food spot in the mall. We'd regularly hear loud bangs and screeching sounds coming from behind the walls. We'd always chalk it up to the pipes or maintenance stuff happening after hours. No big deal, just kind of annoying. Even stranger, the computer screens at our stations would occasionally flicker red, and when they did, the timestamps would always glitch to 1:10 a.m., no matter what time of day it actually was. The screen would flash, the clock would read 1:10, then everything would go back to normal. We figured it was just a software bug, whatever. Then came the night that made me never want to close alone again. It had been a busy evening. The mall was packed and we were clearing up, getting ready to shut down. That's when we heard the screeching again, but this time it was different, much louder, like metal tearing open. Then the computer screens flashed and didn't go back. They turned solid red, just a blank, glowing red screen with the same 1:10 a.m. timestamp in the corner. We looked at each other, weirded out, but trying to stay calm. I stepped away from the counter and looked out into the mall. It was completely empty. There was not a single person, no sound. All the storefronts were dark, gates pulled down, the overhead lights had dimmed. It was like someone had to hit a switch and the whole place shut down instantly. I turned back to my coworker, her face pale, and just whispered, "What the hell's going on?" We stood frozen, watching. And then just as suddenly as it had started, the screeching stopped. The screens flickered again and returned to normal, the usual menu displayed and the correct time. We both looked outside again, and the mall was full of people. Crowds walking by, stores lit up, music playing. It was like nothing had happened at all. But it did. We've never been able to explain it, and no one else we've talked to has had anything similar happen to them, at least not that they'll admit. But after that night, we both swore we'd never laugh at the screen glitch or pipe noises again. I don't know what happened at 1:10 a.m., and I don't think I ever will, but I'd love to find out more. If anything like this has ever happened to you, please share it with me. I think I'm losing my mind. My mum's friend that lived in a subdivision down the street made a post on Facebook that her cat got out and was missing. My mum, sister and I volunteered to help find him, so we hopped in the car and started driving around her subdivision looking for him. It was October the 4th, 2012, around 10 p.m, and very dark out with a thunderstorm in the distance. We were driving on the right side of the road, and on the left side of the road a little girl appeared out of nowhere. She appeared to be around 6 years old and had no legs, amputated just above the knee, with lightish skin and dark hair in a pink outfit. She was rolling herself down the middle of the other lane in a small wheelchair. She had a very stiff posture and was looking straight ahead and didn't acknowledge our car or shield her eyes from our bright headlights. We were both going in opposite directions, so we passed each other rather quickly. There was a moment of silence right after we all saw her, each of us questioning our sanity for a moment. Then we started freaking out a little. My mum quickly turned the car around and we drove back down the street, and the little girl was nowhere to be seen. We were a bit freaked out but ended up continuing our search for the cat. We didn't see anyone else around that entire night. We ended up finding the cat yowling at another cat behind some bushes, and when we returned him to my mum's friend, we told her what happened, and she said she's never seen any little girl matching that description in her subdivision. A few days ago, I made a post on my town's Facebook page reciting this encounter and asking people who lived in that specific area of the subdivision if a little girl in a wheelchair lived there. So far, no one can recall ever seeing a little girl in a wheelchair in the area. I just can't imagine someone letting their 6-year-old in a wheelchair cruise down the street at 10 o'clock at night with no adult supervision. I've searched for old articles involving missing girls or deaths in the area and came up empty. This town is pretty small, so if anything happened around here it would have been big, and everyone would have known about it. However, I suppose some acts can start in one place and end in another, and not all are uncovered immediately. There's an abandoned mountain bike circuit that winds through the woods a few miles from where I live. It used to be part of a small outdoor recreation park before the funding dried up and the land was left to rot. What's left is a looping dirt track carved into the hillside with banked turns, steeps and descents. Late one night, 2 friends and I decided to explore it. We knew the area technically wasn't open anymore, so we waited until everything around us was completely quiet. Before leaving, I checked an old trail map online to refresh my memory of the layout. It was a large loop, with 2 long downhill stretches on opposite sides of the hill, and 4 major turns connecting them. We entered from the lower trailhead to the eastern side, and started walking the loop counterclockwise. The forest swallowed most of the moonlight, and the only clear shapes were the pale ribbon of the trail and the silhouettes of trees on both sides. Near the second berm, high on the northern slope, we noticed a strange trail marker. Someone had stacked several flat stones in a deliberate spiral right in the middle of the track, not something riders would normally leave behind. We stopped there for a bit, sitting on the sloped edge of the berm and talking quietly. One of my friends sets his bike gloves down beside the stone spiral while adjusting his backpack. After a few minutes we continued on, following the trail as it dipped into a long, downhill section. The grade was obvious. We could feel the slope in our legs, and the trees thinned slightly as the truck curved around the hillside. We passed the third turn and followed the trail towards what should have been the southern stretch of the loop. And that's when we saw it again. Another berm came into view, and in the center of it sat the same stone spiral. Not something similar. The same pattern, the same flat stones, the same uneven gaps. Next to it was the bike glove, the same one my friend had left behind earlier. We all stopped at once. There was no arguing about where we were. The elevation was different. The slope we just walked down didn't exit near the first marker. The trail map had shown only one long downhill before this point, and we had followed it exactly. There was no way we had double-backed. There were no intersections or shortcut trails. The loop design made that impossible. The mood shifted instantly. What had felt like a quiet adventure now felt off. We turned around and walked back the way we came, this time paying obsessive attention to every bend and incline, afraid, if we stopped thinking about it, the ground might just shift again. When I got home, I pulled up the trail map and satellite image. The stone spiral shouldn't have existed at all, but even assuming someone had built it, there was only one berm where it could have been placed. The section where we saw it the second time was bare dirt on the map. To this day, none of us can explain how a single object appeared in two separate locations along a trail with no crossovers in the middle of nowhere with no one else around. We all remembered the slopes and turns. I haven't gone back since. Every time I pass the trailhead, I get unsettling feelings that if I follow it long enough, I might not come back. Growing up, whenever I wanted candy, I'd always go to the same store to the corner of my house. It was run by a really nice couple. They weren't from the States, I'm not entirely sure where they were from. They've long since moved. But it was always nice to go in there, and the candy was quite cheap. This story happened after I'd been going there for a few years, just a few months before they packed up and moved elsewhere, in fact. I must have been no more than 12. I had just taken my allowance, my parents weren't home, and I walked myself over to the store. It wasn't far by any means. I made my way in and heard the familiar bell jingle over my head as I walked through. I started looking around, trying to see what I wanted to buy. I had a handful of coins in my pocket, and I took a few of them out because I wanted to make sure I had enough to buy the candies I wanted. But then at that moment, a few coins fell to the ground. And as you can probably guess, a few of the coins fell underneath the shelves. I quickly threw my remaining coins into my pocket and dived onto the ground, looking desperately if I could find my missing coins underneath the shelves. I looked with my eyes, but there wasn't a lot of room. My hand was just thin enough to start scraping the dust and debris away until I could find my missing coins. My entire focus was just on that, the coins. I pulled my hand away when I was sure I had retrieved the last of the coins, and as I stood up, I felt a weird sensation, almost like dizziness. And when I was wiping the dust on my shorts, did I blink in confusion? Because I no longer appeared to be in this store at all. I now appeared to be in a living room. I looked around, absolutely terrified. Had I somehow crawled my way into their home or something? I didn't really know what to say or what to do in that moment, but just blinked stupidly. One thing I can tell you for certain, though, is that I remember grabbing my coins and trying to wipe the dust off them, and I could see the dust fall from the coin and land on this clean floor. Then, not a moment after the dust hitting the floor and me witnessing it, did something happen, and suddenly I was back, standing in the shop again. I look around. I try and move forward and back and everything feels normal. And then I look down to where the dust must have fallen, but there's nothing there. It was the strangest sensation I have ever witnessed. I'm not entirely sure how to describe it, and until I found these kind of stories did I find the right people to share it with. If anyone has any explanation for what this could have been, I'd love to hear it. Even though people say it could have been in my mind, I'll tell you this for certain. There's no way that dust, which was quite a considerable chunk, wouldn't have been visible if it had hit the floor of the store. I know for a fact, wherever I went, a piece of stray dust from underneath the shop went there, and it probably stayed. I had a back injury from an old job and was going to physical therapy. My mum was driving me to and from appointments. The office was only about 10 minutes from our house. On the drive back we were yapping, and a car almost T-boned us through an intersection. It was a close call and shook us up pretty bad. But there were some crazy drivers every day, so we just went back to yapping like usual. We distinctly remember taking the left back on the main road near our house, but in the distraction of conversation didn't realize we somehow ended up on the other side of town, like a completely different side of town. We would have had to have taken a right and several side roads to get to the stoplight we were on when we noticed, and we began freaking out hard about how we got to that road, and I was just in too much pain to try and understand the process, and we'll try and retrace our steps later. The insanely bizarre thing is we made it home in the 10 minutes it would have usually taken us with the normal route, and it physically wasn't possible to get from the doctor's office to that side of town and then back home in that short a space of time. It felt like time or reality glitched. When I was a kid, my brother, cousins and I spent a lot of time at my grandparents' house. It was an older home, 2 stories with a basement. The adults would sit in the living room or kitchen for hours talking, and we'd be sent off to play in the spare rooms or the den at the back of the house. Even though it was one house, certain parts always felt different. The back hallway that led to the basement door was quieter. The lighting was softer there, and as a kid I couldn't explain it, but I always felt like stepping into a slightly separate part of the house. The basement door was at the end of the hallway. It opened to a narrow wooden staircase that went straight down into a large storage basement. My grandparents kept decades worth of things down there: boxes, old toys, furniture, family keepsakes, holiday decorations and antiques. It wasn't messy, just full, like a preserved timeline of their lives. One afternoon we were playing hot and cold with an old silver dollar we found in one of the hallway drawers. It was heavier than normal coins and had a dull shine that made it feel important. None of us knew where it came from, but it looked old, maybe even older than the house, and that made it more exciting to us. While my cousin was hiding it, she dropped it. We heard it hit the hardwood floor with a sharp metallic clink and watched it roll in a perfect arc straight under the basement door. I was closest, so I opened the door to grab it. The basement light was already on, I clearly remember that. And there was a man, standing at the bottom of the stairs. He wasn't moving, just standing there halfway turned, like he'd been in the middle of doing something. He had several items in his arms, a small wooden box that looked like an old radio, and something wrapped in a cloth. I didn't recognize him. He wasn't a neighbor, he wasn't family. He didn't look confused or startled to see me, but just irritated. And the moment our eyes met, his expression hardened and he shouted, "Go back upstairs, kid. Go!" I wasn't panicked. It wasn't the voice of someone caught breaking in. It sounded like a command, like I wasn't supposed to be there. I slammed the door and ran. I didn't even think about the coin. I bolted down the hallway into the living room and told my parents there was a man in the basement. My dad immediately went to check. He and my uncle searched the basement top to bottom. There was no one there. No windows open, no broken locks, no disturbed dust near the small basement window. Nothing missing. No footprints or sound of someone running. The basement light was off when they went down. They told me I must have imagined it. Except my brother and cousin were right behind me when I opened the door. They didn't see him directly. They were a few steps back. But they all heard the man yell. All of us describe the same tone to this day, sharp and annoyed. Years passed, and the story became one of those "remember when you scared yourself" family anecdotes that the family dismissed. Well, about 5 years later, both of my grandparents passed away. My dad and I were helping clear out the basement. This time I was older, old enough to really take in the space. And almost immediately, my dad started noticing things missing. Specific antiques, certain collectibles my grandpa used to show us, a few old radios, some storage boxes that were definitely supposed to be there. No one in the family remembers them being sold or given away. There were no records and no explanations. Standing down there, I got this overwhelming feeling of déjà vu, like I had stood in that exact spot before, just from a different angle. And this is the part I never really know how to explain. The man didn't act like a burglar. He didn't look surprised or drop anything, he didn't try to run. He looked inconvenienced. For years I tried to rationalize it. Maybe someone had found a way in. Maybe he had escaped in the 2 minutes before my dad got downstairs. But here's what bothers me. The basement light was on when I opened the door. It was off when my dad went down. Yet no one remembers turning it off. And the coin? We never found it. It wasn't under the door where my dad checked, and it wasn't on the stairs. It wasn't anywhere in the basement at all. Sometimes I wonder if that silver dollar didn't belong to our house at all. Sometimes I wonder if, for a few seconds, that basement staircase didn't lead to our basement. What if it led somewhere different? And if the man wasn't stealing from my grandparents, what if it was his own basement in another version of our house, and I was the one who suddenly appeared at the top of his stairs? And in that moment we both saw something that we really shouldn't have. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope you have enjoyed our paranormally glitch in the matrix, glitch in reality kind of stories. I always am fascinated by these tales, and if you would like to hear even more of them, you can follow me and subscribe and do all the good stuff. I'd like to give one extra special thanks to my members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen for their continued support of the channel. It really means a hell of a lot, guys, and goes a long, long way. So thank you. But that's it from me, guys. I will see you again soon. Stay awesome, and good night. Years ago, I would hang out with a buddy at his place. His dad was a construction pro who poured everything he had into the place where they lived. And we would spend hours in that gorgeous apartment-style basement, playing PS2 or staging Nerf wars with his scary little brother, who tried to seriously injure me on multiple occasions. The basement felt like its own little world, but it was just too quiet and too perfect, almost uncanny. Like wandering into one of those backroom creepypasta nightmares, and no matter how many times I was down there, I could never shake the prickly sense that something just wasn't right. One afternoon, as his mum called me to the car for my ride home, I realized I'd left my jacket downstairs. I went back in. All the lights were off down there except for the TV blasting pure static, lighting up the walls. In the middle of the basement, they had this odd pantry, and it was completely out of place. Its door was cracked open enough to see inside it a little, and it was just pitch black. It made my skin crawl. Brushing it off, I grabbed my jacket, and I turned towards the stairs, and that's when I heard the softest creak. The pantry door, which had been still, was slowly opening on its own. I tried to walk up the steps, but the moment the door began to move, I was rooted in place. The door was not almost completely opened, and all I could see was pure darkness. After at least 40 seconds, something jolted me back, and I was able to book ass up the stairs. I was running up the stairs. It was like I could feel something right on my ass on the steps behind me. I ran clear through the house and out the door. I literally dove into his mother's car. I did not know what to say, so I sat there for a second, and I thought it must have been his crazy little brother. Seriously, this kid gave off serial killer vibes. I looked behind me to see him already sitting calmly in the back seat, where both my friend and his brother. I had no idea they were already in the car. There was literally no time for either of them to have run up those stairs and climbed into the car to scare or prank me. I told my friends about that a few days later, and sure enough, he said a lot of weird crap had happened in his house for years. I pray that dude is doing good in life today, and that he's not had any more hard experiences. I lived in a haunted house from the ages of 13 to 22. And during those years there were many witnesses to the strange events that took place there, including family members and friends who experienced things both during the day and late at night. Whatever it was that shared a space with us seemed to take a particular interest in my bedroom, almost as if it had claimed that room as its favorite spot. On the very first night we slept in that house, and then again on several scattered nights over the years, I woke up abruptly to the distinct sound of clothes hangers scraping roughly back and forth across a metal rod inside my closet. The harsh, grating noise unmistakable and continuous in the darkness right beside my bed. The creepy part about that sound was that there was absolutely no metal rod installed in that closet at all, only plastic-coated racks with spaced-out slots designed to hold individual hangers in fixed positions, which, theoretically, shouldn't have allowed them to slide around and clatter in that way. When I finally forced myself to get up and open the closet door to check, my hanging clothes were swaying back and forth, as if they had just been pushed or yanked roughly, the fabric still moving and settling while the room stayed otherwise still, and the sight of that made terror spike through me in a way I still remember vividly. On multiple other nights I woke up abruptly to the unmistakable sensation of something heavy sitting directly on my feet or at the very end of the bed, compressing the mattress and trapping my legs under sudden extra weight that hadn't been there when I fell asleep. Whenever I worked up the courage to look towards that area of the bed, either absolutely nothing was visible despite the continued pressure, or there would be this featureless, dense, shadowy mass perched at the foot, which I always felt was silently staring at me in a way that made my skin crawl. One of the worst incidents happened in broad daylight, while the house was full of people, which somehow made it even more unnerving than the nighttime encounters, because it shattered the illusion that daytime and company meant safety. My cousin and I were hanging out in my bedroom with the door closed, talking and just killing time, while my parents were throwing a small party downstairs. My sister was very obviously home as well, making plenty of noise down the hall in her own room. The house was old and large, and it had these heavy oak doors that tended to stick and resist being opened from time to time. Suddenly, all at once, the background noise of the party and my sister's movements vanished completely, leaving an unnatural silence hanging on the other side of my bedroom door. It was as if someone had muted the entire house. The sudden deadness of the air hit us both at the exact same moment, and we stopped talking mid-sentence to stare at each other with wide eyes, because we could each tell the other felt it too. I heard what I assumed were my dad's familiar footsteps coming up the stairs outside my room. The creaks falling in that same pattern I'd heard 1,000 times before, so I called out to him through the door expecting an answer. But nothing came back, not even the muffled sound of movement, just that suffocating, unnatural silence pressing against the wood. I called again, louder this time, and my cousin whispered, "Oh my God," under her breath, as the tension ratcheted up another notch. Then, without warning, there was a sudden, fast rushing sound like a gust of wind or something barreling down the hallway, and something heavy slammed into my bedroom door, so hard the entire door frame vibrated violently around us. We shrieked at the top of our lungs from pure shock, clutching at each other in panic, and before we could recover from that first impact, it slammed into the door again with such ferocity that a visible line, long, jagged and cracked, split down the center of the thick oak panel, as though the wood itself were being forced apart. We screamed even louder, grabbing each other and crying hysterically. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the episode ended, and we could once again hear the party downstairs, and my sister moving around down the hall, as if nothing had happened at all. We yelled over and over for our parents and my sister, but apparently no one heard us through the house. So eventually we gathered enough courage to open the door, slip into the hallway, and bolt down the stairs to the party. where everyone looked up in confusion at the sight of us arriving tear-streaked and shaken. None of the adults or other guests had heard any slamming, rushing wind, or screaming, and they seemed genuinely surprised to find us so upset, insisting the last several minutes had been completely ordinary. No one believed our story, especially my sister, since she claimed she hadn't heard anything at all. But the long split down the center of that heavy oak door is still there, as physical evidence even now. I remember hearing and seeing that wood crack in real time under the impact, and although my dad later shrugged it off by saying me simply must have never noticed the crack before that day, my cousin and I both know exactly what happened. And 30 years later, she flatly refuses to even talk about that afternoon, or the house at all. My room was not very large at all. Just a typical square space mostly taken up by a dresser standing against one wall, and a bookshelf and a TV stand combo over by the corner. That was when my twin-sized bed sat right in the middle, bisecting the room cleanly, separating the entrance door from the sliding door closet on the far side. I liked having the fan on back then since I was young, and it helped me sleep through the warm nights. I had one of those long extended chains hanging from the light so I could turn off the overhead light easily while keeping the fan spinning steadily above my head without missing a beat. So I was in my room messing around not long before bed that evening, playing like always. That was when I always stayed an active kid growing up. Never anywhere in the house without a trusty toy sword, or some toy sword standing close at hand. Tonight was no exception to that habit of mine, carrying through sword grip tight as I moved around the small space carelessly. I do not remember exactly why I swung it that hard, but my sword struck the chain next to the light dead on, sending it whipping up unexpectedly into the air above. Now, anyone who's ever accidentally whacked their own chain knows what comes right after without fail. The chain went flying up, wrapping itself endlessly around the light fixture up there, turning off all the lights suddenly in one twist. So in an instant, I stood plunged into total darkness, thick all around me, pressing close from every side. That was when, annoyed, I clambered onto my bed quickly, starting to reach up tentatively with one hand stretching high. I did not want to stick my fingers into the fan blades spinning steadily overhead at all, but needed to get really close just to begin untangling the mess above. I froze solid when I heard a shuffling sound close by, followed by a low groan echoing soft in the stillness with me. It sounded like the closet door sliding open on its own. That was when I kept trying to reach up carefully despite my heart picking up speed, and now the hairs on my arms stood straight on end, prickling cold. The groan of the door finally stopped after dragging along, but what replaced it was a heavy, throaty breathing sound that filled the dark space. So I imagined it, of course, like any kid would in the pitch darkness, since what boy did not have an overactive imagination? All the same, I felt terrified, unable to shake it off easily that night. That was when I gave up untangling the chain halfway through and reached instead for the top, where it fed straight into the light fixture instead. Now the breathing came closer, steadier, my brain supplying louder sounds and horrifying images of whatever crept towards my bed slowly from the closet side. I found the chain end finally and pulled hard, knowing I did it right that time for sure. That was when I heard the click, but the light stayed off and the dark was pressing in. Perhaps I just wanted it so bad in my panic rising fast, so I pulled it again harder and then once again, desperate with no flood of lights banishing my fears away. Surely the chain wound too tight around the fixture to activate properly on the first try. I couldn't wait another second to find out. I was too exposed. I dove off the bed fast, lunging straight for the door handle. That was when I flung it open, letting hallway light spill in, and I ran across the floor. I whirled around so quickly, toy sword in hand, ready to swing. But nothing stood there waiting in the gloom. That was when the room looked normal enough. A bed, dresser, bookcase with my TV and Xbox perched steadily on top waiting. No monsters hid anywhere in plain sight. I re-entered the room carefully and climbed back onto the bed steadily, with the light feeding in from the corridor, and reached up higher now with the hallway light helping me clear my mind. And then, with a loud click overhead, the light turned on, flooding the room in bright light. Once the light had re-entered the room, I told myself it had all been in my head, at least until I looked over to the closet door, which now stood completely open, with no way to have done so by itself. I have no explanation for this, and I don't even want to try. This happened to me in the early 2010s, when I was just a toddler, no older than 4, living in a modest trailer park nestled in the northern Illinois suburbs alongside my hardworking mum, my cheating deadbeat dad, and my 4 siblings who formed our family dynamic at the time. My father spent most days sneaking around cheating on my mum, while she slaved away as the breadwinner of the family, juggling exhausting day shifts followed by grueling night work, trusting him completely to watch over us kids during her long absences, though he predictably did the exact opposite. My eldest sister was already in her early 20s back then, and is now pushing her 30s, held down her own daytime job, which left my twin sisters, Catalina and Daniela, both in their early teens at the time and early 20s now, to babysit me, the toddler, along with our other sister, Valentina, who was around 10. On this particular night, my dad was out cheating somewhere as usual, my mum and eldest sister grinding through their working hours far away. Valentina and one twin off at a friend's house for the evening, and I ended up alone under the supposed care of one of the twin sisters, Daniela. She had invited several of her friends over to hang out, and their absolute favorite pastime revolved around devising increasingly cool pranks targeted specifically at gullible little me who terrified easily with my shy, scrawny frame, absorbing every tall tale about our trailer park supposedly being constructed atop of an ancient and forgotten cemetery, where residents continually reported eerie, creepy noises echoing through thin walls, as well as fleeting, shadowy figures. Everyone in the park knew these stories intimately, and they scared us kids, especially impressionable me, who jumped at every rustle or flicker, believing monsters waited in every dark corner ready to pounce without mercy. Daniela decided it would be hilarious beyond measure to prank me mercilessly by queuing up some deeply unsettling creepy music playlist on her phone, killing every single light switch throughout our cramped shared bedroom space, and locking me inside alone with the volume cranked high enough to rattle the trailer itself. She executed the setup flawlessly, while her friends howled with laughter, egging her on, and terrified toddler me immediately dissolved into hysterical crying, begging, and pounding on the flimsy door for release, though they refused outright, and all doubled over giggling at my pathetic, desperate pleas, echoing through the room. For several long minutes, stretching into what felt like eternity, the only sounds piercing the oppressive dark consisted solely of my non-stop sobbing mingled with that looping sinister music. Everything changed dramatically, however, when the phone's creepy music cut out abruptly, plunging the room into total, suffocating silence. I adjusted to the darkness enveloping around me, and suddenly, after roughly 5 minutes of that unnatural quiet, I registered a faint, ominous creak emanating directly from our bedroom closet along the small space. The groan of its door beginning to ease open inch by inch, which should have been proven utterly impossible given how ancient and broken that specific closet door truly operated in our decrepit old trailer. No child, not even a full-grown adult, could muster enough force to budge it even slightly, since it jammed stubbornly. There was no way it was a draft or any storm wind or other unnatural force, while the bedroom's lone narrow window remained firmly shut tight and double-locked from earlier that day. I specifically recalled begging my mum earlier that afternoon to please close the closet door completely, because it had always emanated this profoundly weird, wary feeling, radiating unease whenever left ajar, so she obliged, securing it shut tightly herself, ensuring no one else entered our room before nightfall. Daniela lacked the raw strength necessary to pry it open solo, even summoning every ounce of teenage muscle she possessed, and, crucially, no other person occupied the confines of the locked bedroom. The impossible motion terrified me utterly, sending me into fresh paroxysms of fear, banging and clawing at the bedroom door, while shrieking through convulsive sobs, because something sinister lurked inside that closet and was coming for me. Daniela, knowing full well that the closet was almost impossible to open, scoffed at my pleas, thinking it was designed to scare her, or have pity on me, of which there was none. Then, without further warning, this full-blown monster materialized completely, emerging from the closet, its yawning maw stretching ceiling level high, crowned with massive sprawling antlers. There was really no body form, but I could see its arms and legs. But the strangest part was that it was like tree branches were sprouting everywhere on and off its body, completely covering it from head to toe. And I could barely see the two tiniest dots where its face would probably be. When I saw it, my heart sank. I was petrified with fear to the point where I could barely move, and I mustered everything I could, panicking, trying to open the door, but the more I tried, the more my sibling and her friends laughed at me. I whipped my head frantically, alternating between the door's mocking wooden grain and the encroaching abomination making its way closer to me. It never truly walked, but loomed directly in my direction, inch by inch. Interminable frozen staring contest, stretching seconds into eternity. Then I squeezed my eyes shut. Then, suddenly, powerful hands yanked me backwards, violently ripping me free from paralysis, and I snapped my eyes open, discovering Daniela clutching the back of my soaked shirt, hauling me bodily through the now swinging bedroom door, having finally grown alarmed at my unnatural, complete silence, following the non-stop shrieking and pleas. She steadied me roughly as I nearly tumbled forwards from leaning so heavily against the door, immediately demanding what the hell happened to me inside to reduce me to such ghostly pallor and trembling. I babbled the entire horrific sequence. Turning on the harsh overhead light revealed our closet door appearing deceptively completely shut, but upon closer inspection, it had actually been opened slightly. I insisted vehemently that this ajar proof validated every word, absolving me of the sin of fabrication. Yet, despite knowing deep down the closet's legendary immovability required superhuman force, she slammed emotional shutters, refusing point blank to entertain anything I'd said. For years afterwards, whenever subsequent paranormal encounters plagued me, turning me repeatedly into wide-eyed witnesses, I defaulted stubbornly to skepticism and gaslighting my senses, thanks to that formative betrayal, until finally confiding the full story to my mum many years later, when her face drained utterly. She revealed that the precise creature I described matched verbatim the nightmare apparition my other twin sister, Catalina, had tearfully confided seeing peeking menacingly through her bedroom window every single night, alongside identical stalkings emerging from her own closet, cracking open during the sleepless nights. Crucially, no one within our family had ever heard my account beforehand, since Daniela and I swore mutual secrecy, shielding her from parental wrath and assuming no contamination or fabrication opportunities existing whatsoever, making this my mum's first exposure to my testimony. I accused her of fabrication, but she swore that Catalina described the towering antler figure, wreathed entirely in sprouting tree branches, glaring balefully through glass and closet alike, terrorizing her so much she abandoned our shared bedroom entirely, fleeing to the couch or parents' room nightly, until we vacated the cursed trailer park permanently. After which, any traces of the entity vanished. What precisely haunted our closet, targeting specifically me and Catalina with such obsessive demonic fixation? I do not know. A forest demon? A Wendigo? Skinwalker? Or some unimaginable indigenous horror, eternally tied to the land? Mum and I occasionally revisited the trailer park, as we had friends there, and our specific yellow trailer mouldered, perpetually vacant, and abandoned like a plague-stricken ruin, avoided by all neighbors, for reasons they never specified. If anyone has any insight on what I saw, and my sister, I'd love to hear it. I was 3 years old, and living with my mum in a cheap, single-wide trailer parked in a really crappy trailer park out in the middle of nowhere. That was when Mum worked 2 jobs flat out, just to keep us going, and went to cosmetology school at nights after Dad left us high and dry without looking back. So I stayed overnight with my aunts a lot during these hard days, since Mum pulled graveyard shifts, leaving her wiped out come morning light. Next, she'd pick me up from my aunt's house around 7 a.m. One day, tired from another long haul, we drove back to our trailer slowly, and I remember immediately not wanting to go inside, begging to ride my bike, but my exhausted mother just wanted to go to sleep. So inside we went, and she lay in bed. I sat up watching Barney for a while, but being the kind of toddler I was, I kept waking her up asking to go outside to ride my bike, which we usually kept in my room because if we left it outside, it would get stolen. I told my mum I didn't want to go play in my room, so I asked to lay with her. While we were laying there, for some reason I told my mum there was someone in my closet, and he wanted to hurt me. I have no idea how I knew that. I don't even think I went into my room that day. She got up to show me no one was in there, and when she walked into my room, the folding closet door started to open and got stuck on something. Turns out a previously convicted child molester has skipped bail on a new trial, watched my mum's coming and going for a few days, and broken into her house while she was at work. He took my bike into the closet with him, hoping I would come looking for it when we got home. And the only thing that kept him from jumping out of the closet to attack my mum when she walked in there were the spokes on my bikes getting stuck on the little metal tabs on the bottom of these folding closet doors. Needless to say, we ran like hell out of the house, got into the car and drove away. Unfortunately, the guy got out of the house before the cops showed up. They actually caught the guy a few days later in the same trailer park trying to sell drugs to some teenagers, and it just happened to be the same cop that came to my trailer who caught him. And he admitted to breaking into some trailers. We lived in an old house. Everyone, every roommate, every guest who stayed there more than a week, eventually repeated the same rule: to not shut the closet door all the way. No one ever explained why, just that it was better if it stayed open. So out of habit, we always left it open a crack. One night though, we absent-mindedly pushed it shut without thinking. That was the night everything started. It was around 3:30 a.m. My dog was curled up across the pillow above my head, which she did sometimes when she wanted to be close. I woke up because she suddenly started letting out these distressing little cries. I reached up to touch her, but before I could get my hand to her fur, I heard a very faint rattle, like metal on wood. Still half asleep, I lay there listening, and the sound came again, a short, sharp shake of a doorknob. At first I thought it was the bedroom door, but I couldn't see it from the angle I was lying at, and the dog's soft whining had pinned me in place. I was on my left side, my back facing the closet, and slowly, very slowly, I turned onto my back. The rattling was coming from inches behind me, which was the closet door, the one we had been told not to close. The sound stopped the moment I faced upwards. My dog quieted as well. I didn't sleep much after that. But the second night is when things got truly strange. Almost exactly at the same time, 3:30 a.m., within minutes, my dog again started making those soft, dream noises in the same position, and again through that sleepy haze came the unmistakable metallic shake of a doorknob. The closet door. 2 nights in a row, 2 nights at the same time. But the second night didn't end with rattling. When I rolled onto my back bracing myself, I didn't just hear something. I saw right there in the bedroom door a human-shaped figure. He didn't glow exactly. It was more like the air around him rippled with a distortion. That's honestly the closest description that I can give. He was tall and broad, and I immediately knew who it was. It was Jack, the former owner of the house. Everyone had seen him at one point or another. My roommate once watched him float straight through the dining room, whispering the French children's song Alouette, as if he were humming to himself. Another housemate had seen a shape pass behind the mirror. Someone else heard footsteps pacing the upstairs hallway when they were home alone. But this was different. This wasn't glimpsing in passing. This wasn't a corner of the eye figure. This was face to face. I rubbed my eyes so hard I thought I'd given myself floaters, but he didn't go away. He just stood there, not moving nor fading. It took everything in me to find my voice. When I finally managed it, I whispered out, "Hi, Jack." Immediately, his form dematerialized until the room was empty again, and the closet door stayed perfectly still. Why the door rattled, why it mattered, whether it was shut or not, I never knew. None of us ever received an answer. All we knew was that every person who lived in the house always made a point to never close that door. And after that night, trust me, I never did. I grew up in a small town in Kansas called Atkinson. I learned at a very young age that the paranormal is very real, because when I was about 4 years old, my mum and stepdad rented a house on Kearney Street that came with a not-so-happy house ghost. It centered around a spare bedroom on the main floor that was attached to the dining room, specifically the closet. Since at the time I was an only child, my parents decided to turn that spare room into a playroom and threw all the toddler toys you could think of in it. One bright sunny morning, my uncle had set up a toy tunnel to play with. It was basically a bunch of plastic hoops connected by lengths of multicolor plastic fabric. You probably know the kind. At one end was him, being his usual goofy self, and at the other end were the closet doors. The first few times I wiggled through it, nothing happened. But the more times I went through, the darker the closet got, until the last time when something loud whispered my name. I remember going into the empty closet, seeing that there was nobody there, and having a meltdown. My poor uncle had no idea what the hell was happening. I was also kind of a brat. My mum was a big fan of making me stand in the corner when I misbehaved, and her favorite corner to stick me in, directly across from the playroom. I constantly heard that thing whisper my name or tell me to turn around, but I never did. I'm not entirely sure. I might have been dreaming, but one night I think I saw it. My memory goes like this. All three of the bedrooms were upstairs. My parents' room, my room, and my future brother's room. I had just graduated from the crib to a big boy bed, and sometimes rolled out of it onto the hardwood floor. Usually I would just crawl back into bed and go back to sleep, but this time was different. I noticed there was a faint, white, flickering glow coming from the staircase. I, being the curious child I was, went to investigate. As soon as I peeked my little face around the corner so I could see into the dining room, I saw what used to be a woman, glowing white and blue with long wispy hair and a white funeral dress blowing gently in the breeze that wasn't there, floating across the room. As soon as I saw her, I noticed her face was a skull covered in patchy, desiccated skin. She turned to look at me with eyeless sockets and started coming at me. I ran into my room and hid under my bed for the rest of the night, which thankfully passed uneventfully. I woke up the next morning to my mum pulling me out from under the bed, thinking I had rolled out again and fallen back asleep on the floor before I could get myself resituated. I looked back on it now and see that it's probably what happened, but the memory of that thing in the dining room is seared into my memory. It was so vivid that for my whole life I've been convinced it really happened. Today, the lot where the house stood is just a strange alley that leads from Kearney back to another alley at a T-section. The events I've mentioned took place in '82, and I will carry the memory of them forever. But they were only the beginning of my tale. We closed on a house about a month ago, and since then, we've completely gutted it. The only things inside are some tools, a table, a camping chair, and a refrigerator for water. The AC has been off because of renovations, and the water is shut off too. A few weeks ago, on 2 separate occasions, I heard something fall loud enough to sound like something hit the floor. Both times, I went to look, and both times there was nothing out of place. My boyfriend was with me for both incidents and heard the exact same thing. Since the house is practically empty, it's pretty easy to tell when something has moved or fallen, and nothing had. My boyfriend isn't the type to jump to paranormal explanations, but yesterday he was working alone in the master closet early in the morning. He said he suddenly heard a man talking, like a full conversation, coming from the main room. He went out to check, and of course no one was there. The house is in a rural area, so random visitors or neighbors wandering by aren't likely. He locked the front door and went back to work. Today, I was working in the master closet again, while he was on the opposite side of the wall in the laundry room. I left for about 15 minutes, and while I was gone he said it sounded like someone was inside the closet working. I have one of those big job site fans set up in there, so he thought maybe it had toppled over. When he went to check, the fan was upright, and nothing else in the room could have made the noise he heard. He said he finally spoke out loud, "If you're gonna be in here, you might as well help or pay rent." And after that, everything went completely silent. Something similar happened to me last week when I was alone. I was sitting near the center of the house when I heard scratching coming from the master bedroom/bathroom area. Since we live in a rural area, my first thought was raccoons or rats. I walked into the bedroom and hit the wall that leads to my closet, hoping to scare off whatever was there. As soon as my hand hit the wall, almost like it was responding, a loud bang came from the kitchen. It wasn't delayed, but immediate, like something answered back. I went into the kitchen thinking maybe I had knocked something over, but there's nothing in there except a ladder, and that was still in place. There aren't even cabinets or a sink anymore, just the concrete floor and the open plumbing cutout. It leaves you feeling a little crazy, hearing noises you can't explain in a house that's practically empty. I'm not saying it's a ghost, but every normal explanation feels like it's already been ruled out, with no running water, no AC system making noise, no pets, no pests we could find. The house is 25 years old and built of concrete. So now I'm wondering, is there anything I'm overlooking? What could possibly be causing this? The first house I lived in was extremely haunted. And this is from my mum and sister, as I was only 2 when this was happening. So I would wake up at night and stare at the closet and immediately start crying, but only when it was open. However, when my mum would shut it completely around 4 a.m, I would wake up and start crying. When my mum would wake up, the closet would be wide open. From that same closet, my sister, who was 12 at the time, went to get something from the closet for my mum and saw the shadow of someone swinging from a rope in the back of the closet. My memory of that closet was when I was around 5, my sister was babysitting me, and I was in my mum's room watching TV. I heard a noise coming from the closet and thought it was my sister trying to prank me, so I hid to scare her when she came out. My poor little 5-year-old brain was not ready to see what truly stayed in that closet. I saw the door creep open, and it was pitch black in there. These long, bony fingers, darker than the closet, reached out to open the door more, and this tall, black mass slowly started to escape it. Mind you, I'm hiding in a pile of blankets 6 to 7 feet from the door, and the only way out of this room is right where this thing is, so I sit there pale as a ghost, watching this thing attempt to get into the hallway. I begin to cry, terrified that if I make a noise, this thing will attack me. Around that time, I heard my sister coming to check on me, and at that moment, I had to warn her, so I screamed at the top of my lungs to get away from her, and it flew back into the closet and slammed the closet with such force, the neighbor thought a car hit the apartment building. This was a few years ago. I purchased my childhood home with my husband. The first couple of years, we had a toxic roommate who would pit us against each other. Over time, he ended up staying in his room all the time, falling into depression. He found a boyfriend and moved out, and I wasted no time in turning the spare room into guest quarters. I started having horrible insomnia, so to allow my husband to sleep undisturbed, I moved into the guest room, and this is where things got dark. I finally found a healthy sleeping pattern that worked for me, and was getting real sleep, and that's when the nightmares started. A clown was in the closet, but not just any clown, a demonic, evil, twisted clown. Bear in mind, I'm not afraid of clowns in the slightest. He kept telling me that I was to be his bride, and that I needed to kill everyone I loved in order to bring him fully into this world. And in my nightmares, I would plan with him and agree. But I would wake up with the closet door, which had been closed and latched, with an old-school hook-and-eye latch, wide open, and everything in it disheveled. I feared the ex-roommate's depression had opened a doorway for darkness to enter, as he was in a vulnerable state when he occupied the room. After weeks and weeks of those nightmares, every night, I decided to cleanse the house. I opened the front door and burned sage. My husband and I both have indigenous ancestry, so the burning of sage is a cleanse our ancestors held sacred. I started in the attic, making certain the smoke touched even the darkest corners and cleansed room by room. When I began in the spare room, the light bulb exploded, the doorknobs rattled. I didn't stop. I pushed until I felt the energy leave the house. My husband, who was outside with our dog, knew when it was over. I never said a word because he saw the darkness shoot out the front door. We've had no issues since. The nightmare stopped immediately, the closet door remains closed and latched, but I'll never forget the hopelessness and darkness I felt in those dreams, or why I saw it as a clown. Years ago, I rented a small apartment during one of the hardest periods of my life. The place wasn't bad at first glance, tiny but clean enough. It had this narrow hallway that ended at the kitchen, and right there was a pantry closet with one of those motion-activated lights. The closet would end up being the center of some of the strangest experiences I have ever had. The first thing that happened wasn't the closet though. One night our dog startled me and my partner awake. He was normally calm, and definitely not the kind of pup to bark without any reason. But that night he went absolutely wild. He leapt off the bed, stood at the foot of it, and barked and snarled at what looked to us to be empty air. His entire body was tense. We tried to calm him down, but he wouldn't stop staring and growling at that exact same spot, right at the end of our bed, until finally he just collapsed in exhaustion. A few nights later, the closet started acting up. It was about 2 a.m., dead quiet in the apartment, when suddenly the light inside the pantry flicked on. The door was shut, no one was near it, and the motion sensor only triggered if something physically moved inside. I remember just lying there frozen, staring down the hallway. The glow from the closet spilled out through the cracks in the door, faint but enough to make the shadows in the kitchen dance. I got up, heart pounding, and forced myself to check. When I opened the door, the pantry was completely empty. The shelves were bare, nothing inside had shifted or fallen, and I shut the door, went back to bed, and tried to convince myself it was just a faulty sensor. But it didn't stop there. For weeks afterwards, the light would flicker on at random, always between 1 and 3 a.m. Sometimes it would stay on for a long time, other times it would switch off almost immediately. I started dreading that soft click in the dead of night, that faint glow seeping under the door. Once I swear I saw a shadow move across the crack of light, as though something inside shifted when I wasn't looking. It got to the point where I avoided walking past it at night. I'd find myself holding my breath, like if I make a sound, whatever was inside would hear me. I've heard theories about things like this, spirits that drift through, shadows from other places bleeding into ours. I don't know what to believe, but to this day I can still picture the closet door glowing faintly in the dark, and that feeling, like something was just standing on the other side, waiting. A little context at first. My stepmom and I, back then, did not get along very well. That was when my dad divorced her eventually and had a different woman move in with us while we stayed put, getting along great with her right from the start. It was the summer before 8th grade, when the three of us, Dad's first stepmom and I, settled into this 3-bedroom house that looked pretty nice overall from the outside. My best friend and I got really excited about it, since my room became bigger than before with more things to do inside now that I was more spread out. Now, in the corner of the hallway right where my parents' door sat, was always very dark, abnormally dark, and eerie, pressing in heavy. I had to walk past it every time to reach my room or head back to the kitchen. So within the first week of living there, I started hearing scratches in the walls between my room and the office, faint and consistent night after night. Anytime I stayed in the living room, something thudded loud nearby. Now, having 2 cats around meant I wasn't so unnerved by this, since they knocked things over playing or jumping high onto shelves often enough. I often ignored those sounds, brushing them off as just feline movement, and wouldn't bat an eye. Well, one night I came home from a school dance, carrying a bright star balloon, and gave it to my stepmom for no reason, just feeling nice. That was when she told me to put it in her room simply, so I carried it down the hall. Next, I tucked it into her closet since both parents had separate ones built in deep. And the 2 of us forgot about it completely after that moment passed. 2 weeks later, she got home from work before I returned from school that afternoon, tired. That was when I walked in, and she confronted me, asking if I'd left the balloon in the hallway in plain sight. So me being confused, with no memory of any balloon at first, I walked into the hallway to check for myself. And there sat the silver balloon, fully inflated in the center of the hallway, still floating. I racked my memory and told her that it came from the school dance weeks ago. And that was when we both knew it was very unlikely, since it had to have passed through 2 closed doors in our AC, and it was too weak to push anything like that around. But we both agreed that it was simple enough, and forgot about the oddity, pushing ahead like normal. Cut to a few months later, when my stepmom came up to me suddenly explaining what had just happened in her room alone. That she had just sat there and was doing her makeup when out of the corner of her eye where the closet stood, she thought she saw me lurking there quietly. She said she was not in the mood for messing around right then and turned around quickly to face where I stood. But no one waited there in the empty space staring back at her. So she tried laughing it off as a weird trick of the night. That was when things stayed calm without much stirring up, until after she moved out, and the new stepmom settling in, replacing her. Noises started back up. Faint scratchings and thuds returned like before. I thought nothing of it, since now 2 dogs joined our 2 cats, making double the odd bumps and paw paddings around the house. Mum and I talked about ghosts one evening casually, sharing how she saw them clearly sometimes from past places. That was when, after stories of previous haunted houses, did she drop the bomb about a little girl hiding in her closet watching. So she sometimes moved from parents' rooms to the office or just outside the hallway corner peering out shyly. Mum and Dad advised her never to seek out a spirit since they craved validity, staying real once acknowledged. She told me that the girl was afraid of women but loved my father, and that the girl would just stare at my mum from her corner. I, being a horror movie nerd but skeptic, decided to heed her warning and not do anything and just ignore all the weird. A few months into my mum moving in, she comes into my room late at night. She's shaking and saying that something is wrong with my dad, and she thinks only I can help. I walk in. My dad is just staring at the closet while breathing heavy and crying. And for those obviously unaware, my dad is a very tall and rough man who never cries or shows his fear, so seeing this is immediately alarming. I rush to his side and start calling his name. He doesn't respond and just stares at the closet. I try asking my mum what happened, and she just said that he was trying to sleep, but woke up and started doing this. I wanted to try and get him up and get him out the room. Once he sat on the couch in the living room, he started coming to and asking why he was there and what had happened. He insisted he go back to bed despite our protests. The cycle of him going to bed, then start gasping and crying, then coming into the living room continued, till we brought him to the porch outside where he said he felt clearer, but that it also felt like someone was hugging him like a child. He said he felt the little girl's sadness and that she was calling to him. He again went back into the room and started the cycle, but when he came into the living room, he started getting violent, demanding to go into the room and that she needed him. That she was crying for him. My mother blocked the door into the hallway with a Bible and cross in hand and said he wouldn't pass. My father then said that he would get into that room sooner or later. This was way out of my dad's personality. Anytime my mother would come near him with the Bible and cross, he would tell her to get away, that he didn't want her near him, that he needed to go into the room because that was his room. Eventually he made a deal with us, that if he could talk to the girl, that he would do what we wanted, that all he needed was to talk to her. We begrudgingly let him, and we were told to stay in the living room, and after 5 minutes he came back out completely fine. When we inquired as to what happened and what they talked about, my dad said he promised the girl he wouldn't share it, but he told us what had happened before. He said the little girl's mother was just angry and hateful. This scared my mum and I. We just wanted this to all be over. It was 3 AM at this point, and we were exhausted. When my parents went into their room, nothing else happened. I finally fell asleep after much tossing and turning, and in the morning my father didn't have much memory of anything, mainly just being on the couch and on the porch. I used to have videos, but they got erased. My parents don't really speak about that now. One more big thing happened after that night. So for a bit more context, my father and I used to make it a tradition to go down to a resale shop at our last house and buy these porcelain dolls. They were very beautiful, and we never had any problems with them before. Neither of my stepmums were a fan of the dolls because they thought they were creepy. So because I didn't have any space in my room, I had to put them in my closet. They all stood up and were very stable, having a stand wired to their backs. These dolls weren't moving and had stayed in that position for months. So I was in my room, settling down for the night. A few minutes after I had turned off my light and was relaxing, I heard a loud thud from my closet. My mind is racing because I don't know what possibly could have made that noise. My brain tried to reason that maybe one of the cats was in the closet and they wanted out, or that maybe something just broke. I then worked the nerve to get out of bed and find out what it was. I could hear my heart in my ears racing and booming. It felt like 10 minutes just standing outside my closet, trying to build up my nerve to open the door. I turned the knob and reopened it, my eyes scanning the darkness. I decided to walk in and find the drawstring, and when I came face to face with my doll, strung up by her hair on a hanger, my scream caught in my throat, and my heart nearly stopped. How the hell is she like that? My dolls hadn't moved in months, and have never fallen down like that. It was impossible for her to have fell from where she was originally placed, and land on the hanger below. All my dolls were crammed together, but none of them had moved as much as an inch. The only way she could have fallen without disturbing the other dolls was to fall forward, but she fell at an angle of about 60 degrees. Just no way. I called my dad. He laughed at me and called me a weenie, but he did put my dolls in the attic and went to bed. The only minor thing that happened after that was like seeing someone walk across the doorway in the bedroom, but no one was there. The dogs were going nuts for no reason. We've since moved, but I still get chills when thinking about stepping foot in that house. I know this sounds far-fetched, but it feels good to tell someone. I feel bad for the people who next move into that house, because that little girl's their problem now. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I'm going to be trialing cutting the intros for a little while. If you really want to know why, well, it's because YouTube is really giving me a hard time with spreading the joy of the horror stories out into the wider internet, and I feel that maybe just cutting it might help keep some retention in, so that's what I'm going to be trying. Just bear that in mind. Probably a few more visuals as well, gonna give that a go, see how people respond. It's been a while since people have complained, I've added them in sparingly, so because no one's actually said anything, I think I might try it again, because I think, you know, like a visual thing looks a bit better than just black screen, and that also could help encourage new listeners. So, you know, I'm going to be trying some stuff, basically, and I hope that it is to your liking. Of course, if there are complaints, feedback, etc., I would appreciate hearing it too, because I would really like to see some more growth, because my growth, guys, is literally like, it's crazy. It's like 200 subs a month, which, you know, is really small. It's the smallest it's ever been. Like, when I started, obviously it was tiny, but you know, when I got the ball rolling, it, you know, started to really grow, and you know, now it's really seemed to just kind of shrink. I know that the problem is because everyone is like putting all their attention into, you know, YouTube Shorts and TikToks and Reels and stuff. So it's to be expected, but still I need to try and win back some new audience. So I hope you guys will help me out on this endeavor with, you know, your support and stuff. But now that the whole service announcement is out the way, I will be back hopefully tomorrow with another video. Might be changing up the schedule a bit too, to try and see if I can, you know, more videos to entice more people to listen. I don't know, we're going to be trying some cool stuff. I might even just like post a picture of what the schedule might look like once I organize it after I finish editing. Once I finish editing this, gosh, tongue-tied today. Alright then guys, I'm going to wrap things up. Final thanks to my members and patrons whose names have been rolling in the credits. If you'd like some cool perks and stuff, you can follow the links to find out more. But that's it from me. Oh, and if you have your birthday in the next month, please, you know, get it to me quickly, because I'm going to be trying to get my videos done in advance with the new stuff I'm trying. So I would appreciate knowing your birthday if you're a member or patron, just so that I can do that. Alright, cool. Cheers guys, bye! It was spring of 1998, and I, a then 15-year-old female, was a high school sophomore. I had an argument with my mother late in the evening, and decided to leave the house and take a walk around town to clear my head after. I walked from my suburban neighborhood about 2 miles to downtown, and looped around to walk home again. It must have been around midnight, on my way back and about a half-mile from home, when I noticed a pickup truck with a shell on the back pass me by slowly a few times along a main street with no other cars around. Once I realized it was the same vehicle, after the third time passing me, the primal fear set in. Maybe the driver was lost? No. I felt my heart racing, my body went numb. When the truck passed me a fourth time, it didn't stop, but I could tell whoever was driving it was definitely scoping me out. It drove off again, but I heard it turn around once more over the crest in the hill as I was walking up. I ran for my life behind a building on the main street and into a neighborhood where I chose to trespass into a residential property to avoid this person in the truck who was following me. I heard the truck drive by with the engine roaring, accelerating down this small residential street as I hid in the bushes of someone's yard, terrified. The truck began scouting this neighborhood. When it turned onto another street away from me, I ran down the block further towards home until I was safe, but shaken by the experience. A little over a year later, a local man called Rex Krebs was arrested and charged with the abduction, rape, and unaliving of 2 young women from the same part of town where I had my experience being followed. One of the murder locations being about 4 blocks from where I hid in the bush while being followed. The newspaper ran a huge story on the case and included the article's photo, the killer's pickup truck that he used to abduct his 2 victims. And what do you know? It was the same truck that was following me that one night. It just goes to show how close I was from probably ending up dead, all because of an argument with my mother. I had just finished my courses of the year, and summer was right around the corner, so it meant that it was time to catch up with some of my friends. On this particular occasion, it was Nathan. Nathan was my best friend at the time, and we would sometimes spend months without seeing each other, but when we did hang out, we would always do the same thing. Go get some snacks, catch up over coffee before sunset, then walk around town until around 9 PM and call it a day. This time, though, nothing felt unusual. From the moment I saw him, something in my stomach just dropped. It wasn't him per se. We were on good terms, but something about hanging out that day felt off. Right as I greeted him with a handshake and went to our usual spot for coffee. We got there and things went by the books. I shook it off as me being nervous because I hadn't seen him in a long time. That was, of course, until Nathan mentioned that he felt like things around us were weird. Another drop in my stomach, but I kept my cool, trying not to sound too paranoid or something, but I guess I couldn't help it. "You feel it too?" I asked. He nodded. He said that he couldn't pinpoint what was wrong, but it was like our surroundings were odd, even hostile, even when there was nothing to fear. Was this some sort of shared paranoia? Was the end of the year getting to us? We didn't know, but we were sure that it was the first time we felt something like that. We finished our coffee and felt like maybe having a walk that wasn't going to be our best idea. Maybe we should call it a day now and just go back to our homes while there was still light. At that moment, my dad called me and asked if I could find out the price of a phone he was thinking about buying. So we were going to the store. In my mind, I kept thinking, yeah, I'll ask about this and then we'll split. But no, for some reason, and even after what we felt, decided to do our long walk until dark. This was my last chance to turn back before it all went down. We used to walk around this boulevard that wasn't really a dangerous area during a normal weekend. It used to be filled with teenagers and young adults sitting on the grass division in the middle, drinking or smoking and listening to music. It was a Saturday at 8:30 p.m, completely empty. I like to think that it was my last warning. As we passed a corner, I noticed two other guys who were coming from it as we crossed the street and kept walking straight. I looked over my shoulder, and I noticed that they were behind us. They were probably around our age, maybe older. Now, something that doesn't normally trigger my red flags, but did with these two. What set me off is that they weren't talking like us. They were dead silent. Secondly, their pace was off. They weren't trying to pass us, but they didn't stay way behind either. They were keeping distant. We were completely alone on that street, the four of us, and as we approached the end of the boulevard, which goes down into a big park, I warned Nathan, "Hey, these two behind us, they might be onto something." Nathan looked over his shoulder and then back at me and said, "Want to cross the street just to be sure?" I nodded, and we did so. We crossed the grass area in the middle and onto the other side and kept walking forward down the street. And that was when I saw it and when my heart, gut, and every organ in my body knew before my brain could process it. The guys on the other side upped their pace. One of them grabbed something from the fanny bag he had on his chest and went ahead of his friend. Before I could react, the guy crossed the street in front of us and said, "Boys, keep it quiet or we'll shoot you both dead," as his partner approached us too. My vision went blurry. I couldn't see their faces anymore. All I could see was that they were in front of us, threatening to end our lives, and seemingly armed. I froze. My entire life flashed before me. My parents, my girlfriend, the dog we had just rescued that I was happy to see every time I got home. What was the last thing I had said to any of them? And knowing that I would probably never see them again. In a panic, I gave one of them my phone and raised my hand, but Nathan managed to snap and ran away while I stayed frozen, with those two knobheads threatening us and telling him to come back. It wasn't until he yelled "run" that I snapped to and ran towards him. I tripped not far from where I started, and I heard from behind me, "Shoot him now!" And I thought, that's it, that's how I go. But I gathered my strength and got up. I kept running, expecting to hear a gunshot behind me and fall to my death, but it never rang. We ran all the way back. I was finally able to talk again, but all I could muster was, "Help, please," at the top of my lungs. We ran a few blocks until we stopped from exhaustion. Nathan had lost his glasses back at the boulevard and wanted to go back, because he couldn't see without them and getting a new pair was very expensive. But I refused, and told him I would stay here and wait for help or the police. But eventually he convinced me and we went back carefully, to the places where our lives changed forever. Lucky enough he found them, and those two guys were long gone. You know, I feel that everything that happened before that horrific moment was some kind of warning sign trying to stop us from going there. Hell, when the dust settled and people started showing up in the boulevard, the same kind of people I described earlier, we came across a woman who was waiting for her husband to get out of work. And upon hearing what happened, she offered us a ride to my house and we accepted. When we got there, I hugged my mum like I'd never done so in my life, and was so thankful for being able to do so. Needless to say, the 5th of November changed me forever. I know that it could have happened on any date, any hour or anywhere, but it would never be a normal day for me again. Nathan and I drifted apart not because of this, but our friendship was never really the same afterwards, especially with me refusing to go around these areas at night, especially if we were walking. I will never ever ignore that feeling again, and if your gut tells you that something is off, trust me, it is. I had one of the most terrifying stalking experiences 12 years ago. I was an 18-year-old female at the time, and The Great Gatsby movie with Leonardo DiCaprio had been released. Being really young, inexperienced, and very naive about how to remain safe with unwanted attention, I made every mistake in the book with a guy who was 23 at the time that started stalking me. I had just graduated high school and took a job at a health food store in my downtown area. It was my first customer service job. The owner was a big hippie who was easy to work with and flexible with hours. At first, I worked different shifts, eventually taking the afternoon to closing hours. Due to how small the store was, I was alone without other co-workers, only our owner sporadically dropping in to grab items off the shelf for her personal use, then leaving after about half an hour or so. As a side note, our store was situated next to the building that had subsidized housing for those recently released from incarceration or lower income. The evening/nighttime hours were risky for young women to be out without a male escort. Every restaurant in the downtown area had staff that escorted girls to their cars, as it was common to be followed with assaults happening after dark. I was on edge during closing, but felt some reassurance, as I had parked immediately outside our back exit, just a few feet from the door. But I was in the store closing out the register, cleaning and locking up every night alone. The front of the store was where the cash register was set up, but your back was to the large window that was right next to the sidewalk. The register faced the inside of the store, and it wasn't uncommon for me to feel people watching me and catch creepy guys looking at me through the window right behind where I was standing. Again, young and inexperienced, I didn't voice my fears or report the randos that would be a foot away watching me, only separated by the glass window. I picked up a shift during the summer farmers market in the morning. It was a great day. I was so happy to work in the morning and have a higher flow of customers, and one guy called Cam came into the store with a brochure for a local event at a spiritual center in the downtown area. I was pleasant, smiling, and got permission for us to post it on our register. He was obviously high, nothing crazy, and looked chill. You could tell he was in his own world. We spoke for maybe 5 minutes, and I didn't think much of the encounter and moved on with my day. On my next shift, Cam comes into the store. He struck up a conversation and was trying to keep my attention. Again, working in the afternoon when we had maybe 2 or 3 people come in before close, he just hung out right at the register. I was trying to give hints that I needed to focus on work, but he would just follow me around the store while commenting on how gorgeous my legs were and that he thought I had been an angel the last time he saw me. He kept telling me he had a spiritual awakening because I had shown him interest in how nice I was, insisting I was flirting and that the sun behind my head made my hair glow like a halo. Again, young and not experienced with guys, I was equally creeped out, but also a little flattered because I'd never had that kind of attention. I thanked him for the compliments, didn't call out that they were inappropriate, just made the same excuse that I needed to focus and walked away. Per usual, he just shadowed me everywhere I went, watching me but not really talking anymore. I was getting really freaked out. I let him know he was loitering and needed to leave unless he was there to shop. Given how pricey the items were, I figured it would deter him. He ended up using his food stamps to buy 1 soda or piece of candy every hour, maybe $3 spent an hour, and he'd make the excuse he was a customer. I went to the bathroom to at least get some privacy. My boss had seen him hanging out in the store before but never commented. I called her and told her that I was getting scared by this guy, letting her know he was making an excuse to stay by buying one cheap item and insisting he was a customer through the whole of my shift. I really thought she'd give me support and come to the store. She was a self-proclaimed feminist that espoused consent and boundaries, so I got major whiplashed when she defended his presence. She told me the store was in the red and on the brink of needing to close. Because he was spending any money, I shouldn't try to push him out the store. I tried arguing that he wasn't generating significant income, and she just doubled down that money was money, and then insisted I was overthinking it, and Cam was just a kind soul that had found a similar soul bond with me, and that created positive energy in the store. What the hell? So, there was a roadblock there. All I could do was carry on. The idea of quitting didn't even cross my mind, being my first job. I was worried it would look bad if I left only after a few months, and it was really hard to find a local position that was flexible with school hours, and I would be starting my first semester at the local college soon. Things slowly escalated. Cam started bringing me flowers every day. He would leave long notes confessing his love and insisting we were soulmates. Then he'd randomly play the Great Gatsby soundtrack. He would go on telling me that he was Gatsby and I was his Daisy. We were destined to be together, and that my denial of our bond was just like Gatsby's attempt to get Daisy. We were living out the movie, but our ending would be the coming together of souls wrapped in passion. He had this crazed look in his eyes every time he brought it up. Then he started just calling me Daisy. Any time another customer would come in, he would get angry and jealous that I ignored him and walked away. He started calling himself my bodyguard and told me it was his duty to beat up anyone that looked at me wrong or made a pass at me that would be a threat to our love. Again, I want to emphasize that I was so stupid for not quitting this job or telling anyone about this. It was an understatement that I was a complete dumbass for not making police reports, documenting things, or creating boundaries, leaving my job, or telling my friends, parents, or co-workers. For a few weeks he didn't show up. I thought there would finally be a break or he lost interest. Then he showed back up, told me he was hospitalized. Great. The same routine started all over again. Then one day I get a text from an unknown number. It was Cam. Not only did he get my number from a co-worker who he lied to saying he had a new phone and lost my number, but he did a reverse search and found my address. He didn't have transportation and I was on the other side of town. We didn't have a bus system and it was too far to walk. As far as I know, he never came to my house, but I'm sure he did, and I just wasn't aware. I didn't block his number. Again, that was so dumb, but honestly I was so scared because he knew where I lived and was so entrenched in this idea that we were bound to be together, I thought things would escalate more. I either ignored his texts or made dumb excuses for not responding. I would be curt and he wouldn't take the hint. When I started my semester at school, it got worse again. He formed a group of friends and told me he'd introduce them. First, he wanted me to go to his apartment. When I insisted I wouldn't, he brought them to the store. I stupidly thought they were nice people, but they sided with him, saying that he was a really nice guy and that I should give him a chance. Told me he was just being melodramatic and liked playing out fantasies, but that he wasn't a bad guy. A few days later, Cam told me he was concerned for my safety with the darker evenings. He told me he'd have his friends posted outside the front and back of the store to make sure I was safe. And they did, and it was freaky as hell. Now, growing up in a household of abuse, I didn't register the damage of this situation. I was accustomed to bad things happening to me, and was still stuck in a compliant/submissive response mode. This behavioral pattern didn't make me fight the setup. They started bringing more deliveries of gifts from me to Cam, and the 5 of them now loitered in the store with Cam during my shifts, each of them buying one thing each hour to remain customers. It was getting too scary. 6 guys in the store, me, alone, young female, exits being blocked by them as they insisted they were my bodyguards who would watch the doors. My nightly habit became kicking them out, locking the store and finishing my work in the dark so they couldn't see me inside, and then stay in the building for 2 hours so they'd go away. It worked for a week. Then one night I stepped out the door and all of them were either leaning against the wall by the exit door or leaning on my car smoking and drinking. Cam came and tried to hug me with his buddies whooping in the background. He reeked of weed and alcohol, and honestly I thought they were going to grab me and force me into the apartment. I made my car alarm go off, and it scared them enough that I was able to jump in, lock the doors and floor out of the parking lot. I didn't give notice, I just told the owner I was done, and didn't tell anyone about what happened. Cam kept trying to text me, told me I was denying our destiny and wasn't going to give up on us. I stopped responding. Then I blocked his number. Then he'd get new numbers and text again. His texts got more threatening. As I ignored him, I started hearing cars drive by at odd hours of the night, and he would text me to let me know he was still my dedicated protector and make sure I was safe. It was obvious one of his buddies was giving him rides to snoop at my house. All of a sudden, it all stopped. Radio silence, and I was so relieved. 6 months went by with nothing. Then, there was a random phone call from another unknown number. I was in group chats with other students for projects and thought it was one of them calling me, but it was Cam. He told me he violated his parole and was in jail the last 6 months. He had thought of me every day. I was his daisy, and he was going to come for me. We would finally be together, and he'd prove to me that we had an undeniable love, that I would love his male member, and already was fantasizing about it while in jail. As you could imagine, I was just pale as a ghost and speechless. All I could think was to fake a story about going abroad for study in 2 weeks. He started screaming at me for running away from our connection. He said he'd find me and come after me no matter where I went. I just hung up the phone, trashed it and got a new phone with a new number, deleted my Facebook, and finally moved to a large city an hour away. I had to upend my entire life because of this worthless piece of trash, and I was so inexperienced and naive. I made so many mistakes. I was just glad the worst case scenarios never played out, and it was a steep learning curve that taught me how to protect myself in the future. That wasn't the last of my weird encounters. One guy at college who transferred to the larger university from our local college got a similar fixation on following me to the larger campus. He had a fetish for being stalked. He would find me in the school union and talk about how hot it would be if he found me going through his trash in the middle of the night. Thankfully, it was a huge campus and I got friends enlisted to watch out for him and let me know where to avoid. But Christ, there are so many creeps out there, and it really sucks being a woman. I was in Barcelona with a few friends, and like most trips, the night started off completely normal and harmless. We had spent the day doing the usual tourist stuff, and by the time night rolled around we were already a few drinks in and just looking for somewhere casual to keep things going. We ended up in this small, very local bar tucked away from the main streets. It wasn't sketchy at first glance, but somewhat dimly lit, and filled with regulars who clearly all knew each other. The bartender took an interest in us pretty quickly, probably because we were outsiders and foreign, and started chatting with us while pouring drinks. At first, it felt like good luck. He was talkative and friendly and kept the drinks coming. We were joking around, trying to piece together conversations through broken Spanish and English, and it felt really good. That's when he told us about another bar he liked, somewhere better and more fun. He said he'd take us there himself once he finished his shift. Looking back, that should have been the moment just to say no, and we were good, but we didn't. By the time he closed up, my two friends were a lot more drunk than I was, and I was just buzzed enough to go along without really questioning anything. We stepped outside with him, he flagged down a taxi, and we all piled in together like it was the most normal thing in the world. At first, the drive didn't feel strange. It was just city streets passing, lights, the usual late-night traffic. But after a while, I started to notice how long we'd been driving. The buildings started to thin out, the lighting changed. It slowly stopped feeling like we were just heading to another bar nearby. I leaned forward and asked how far this place was, but he didn't answer. He just laughed and said something to the driver in Spanish, who laughed as well. There was something about the way they laughed that didn't feel like a joke I was in on. It felt like I'd missed something important, or worse, that I wasn't supposed to understand it. I looked out the window again, and now it was undeniable. We were leaving the city. The streets were darker and more spaced out, and there were stretches where there was almost nothing around us. We stopped at a red light, and without thinking about it, I shoved the door open and physically pushed my two friends out the car, telling them to run. They stumbled, confused, not fully understanding the situation, but followed my lead. Once I got right out behind them and slammed the door, we just moved. The taxi didn't follow us and just drove off, and we were standing there in the middle of somewhere we didn't recognize with no real sense of where we were. The roads were mostly empty. And then we got lucky. Another taxi came down the road and we flagged it down. The driver stopped, rolled down his window and immediately looked confused, and we piled in and began explaining where we needed to go. We told him where we'd come from, and he looked genuinely surprised and slightly concerned and asked how we ended up there. When we told him the story, he shook his head and explained that we were further away than we should have been, especially from where we started. He was actually on his way home and done for the night, but after hearing our story, agreed to take us back into the city anyway. We never found out where that first taxi was taking us, and maybe it was nothing, but I personally think they were in on something and wanted to get 3 drunk women whisked away to somewhere to do who knows what to them, or maybe even trafficked. I'm glad I never found out what. Be careful with your drinks while abroad, ladies. For context, my best friend and I are both from London, but her family on her dad's side is from Ireland, so she goes there every summer for the entire summer. Last summer, I went to go and stay with her for 2 weeks at her grandfather's house. Her grandfather lives in rural, like proper rural Ireland. The town is at least a 40-minute drive away, and his house is the only building within the area. It backs onto a massive forest and faces onto a lake. It's really quite beautiful, but that's beside the point. My best friend's granddad, brother, aunt, and dad were going to the pub one evening. They invited us, which of course was a tempting offer, but we declined, as we were excited at the prospect of having the house to ourselves. So, we decided to have a chill evening in and basically play house. Of course, if you've been to Ireland, you know that a quick pint is anything but quick, and her family had been gone for some time at this point, which was at least a few hours. It was approaching 10 p.m. We were watching a movie in her living room when we heard a knock on the door. We reckoned maybe it was her family who'd forgotten their keys, so we went to answer. Her grandfather's front door led into the conservatory, which then led to the actual front door of the house, so we made it into the conservatory door, expecting her family. But instead, there was a man at the door. Slightly confused, we kind of looked at him, waiting for him to say something, during which I had to take in his appearance. There was something off about him, to say the least. He looked insane, bizarrely alert, and yet slightly scary. I can't quite explain it adequately. He said his car had broken down, and he needed to use the phone to call someone to pick him up. I looked out, but couldn't see a car at all, and said something to the effect of, "Where's your car?" He responded by explaining that it had broken down about 30 minutes down the road and had walked and walked until he finally fell upon this house. Given that, as I explained prior, my friend's granddad lived in a fairly remote area, so this was plausible. With a slight hesitation, my friend passed him her phone and said he could use it to call and waited on the doorstep. He didn't accept the offer. Instead, he just kind of ignored it and started asking if there were any adults or parents in the house. I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt and assumed he was asking this as maybe he felt more comfortable sharing his predicament with adults rather than two teenage girls. We didn't know if we should tell him if we were alone or not, because we would usually know better, but given the situation, we explained they were out but be back soon. That's when he started to look past us and into the house itself, and began insisting that we let him into the house, as he wanted to use the landline. At this point, we were more than suspicious, because if he wanted to call someone, why not just use my friend's phone? He was erratic, continuously insisting that we let him in. At that point, my friend said he could either use her mobile or leave, but beyond that, there was nothing more we could do for him. He insisted he come into the house, so we just shut the door on him and locked it, then locked the door to the actual house. Freaked out, we sat in her living room trying to peep out the window and see if he had gone. He lingered for a bit, looking into the windows to try and find another way in. But then we saw him leave, though we couldn't make out in which direction he had gone. We were scared as hell. To add fuel to the fire, my friend explained that the nearby town was pretty small, and everyone in the area pretty much knew each other. She had never seen him in his life, which scared her the most, as she was well acquainted with the entire town by now. We contemplated calling her dad, but since it had been about 30 minutes with no disruption, we just left it and continued on with our night. Later on, her dog was getting restless, and her family was still out, so he let her into the back garden. After about 5 minutes, we heard her barking, but it was too dark to see what she was barking at, so we put it down to more than likely being a goat, because that was usually the case. We called her in and went about our night. We realized her family probably wouldn't be back until the early hours, and instead of waiting for them, we decided to head for bed. I went into the kitchen, which is in the back of the house, to get some water, when I heard someone shaking the handle on the back door, trying to get in. The thing is, it's a really old house, so I didn't exactly put all my faith into the door holding up against the weight of what I suspected to be a grown man. I screamed bloody murder, and my friend ran down the stairs. At this point, he was banging on the door like his life depended on it, and I swear to God, I felt my heart fall out my butthole. My friend shouted back that she was going to call the police, which was a lie as she'd taken her phone upstairs, but she thought it could deter him. Luckily, this seemed to scare him off. He stopped banging. We heard his footsteps retreat further and further away until we could no longer hear them. We were frozen in fear and couldn't even speak to each other. Then we heard the front door open and pretty much thought that was it for us. On instinct, my friend grabbed a knife and we hid in the pantry. You can only imagine our relief when we heard her dad calling out for us saying they were back. We were absolutely dazed, and I'm sure they could tell. So we frantically asked them, "Did you see a car on your way here, a broken down one?" They responded that they didn't, and I swear to God I defecated myself there and then. So to the strange man who tried to break into my best friend's granddad's house at night, let's never meet again. I used to work as a supervisor for a janitorial company, and a couple of times a week, I'd be assigned to a middle school to clean the hallway floors in the gymnasium. They had this big floor scrubbing machine, basically a Zamboni for tile, and once I got the hang of it, I could finish my route pretty fast. Most nights I had the entire school to myself. When I wrap up early, I'd usually head to the library, sit in the back by the big windows and eat my dinner while I read. It was quiet in a way you don't really get during the day, with just the hum of the building and the echo of my footsteps. So the morning after one of my shifts there, my phone rang. It was school security asking me to come in. Their tone alone told me it wasn't routine. When I pulled into the lot, I saw a police car parked out front, and my stomach dropped. Inside, they started with basic questions. Did you notice anything unusual last night? Did you see anyone around? Stuff like that. I told them no. Honestly, I rarely noticed much at all. I usually had headphones in while I worked, the machine droning underneath whatever I had listening to. They then brought me into the security office and pulled up a camera feed. On the screen was footage from the previous night. There I was, riding the scrubber down one of the main hallways, and not far from me, close enough that if I'd have turned my head, I might have seen movement. Someone was slipping into the classroom, clear as day. They had broken in while I was right there. They showed me the rest of the footage. I stayed in the building for another 2 hours after that, completely unaware. Nothing was stolen and nothing was disturbed, and then came the part that still weirds me out. There's no footage of them leaving. No sign of the door they used being opened again. Security and police had to sweep the entire school from top to bottom, every classroom, every storage room, every stairwell. They never told me if they found anything or anyone, and I never got any follow-up. All I know is that someone was in that building with me the whole time, close enough to hear the machine whirring down the halls, and I had absolutely no idea. I'm not sure if I was in any danger, but it's an unsettling thought, because who knew what kind of intentions they had, why they were there to begin with, or what they'd have done with me if I was inconveniencing what they were planning to do. I am a female of 21 years and work in the hospitality industry, specifically doing graveyard shifts, usually from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. I've seen and dealt with some of the most insane experiences, and at this point could probably write a book. But this particular experience was one that was the most frightening. I was brought up to be caring, empathetic, and understanding. These core values mean a lot to me, and I live by them. On numerous occasions, I've been told that constantly having this mentality can lead me to being targeted by people with ill intentions, and I didn't believe that. It's nice to be nice after all. But in hindsight, after everything that's happened, I've learned to be a bit more skeptical. Usually on these graveyard shifts, there were 2 of us in the building at all times, and when we finish our work, we're basically free to sit down and relax for the remainder of our shift, or at least until the morning manager arrived at roughly 6 a.m. So, I did just that. Finished my tasks, and sat down in the main area of the building to have a late night snack and watch some reels on my phone, as you do. My co-worker decided he would take a nap, as it was roughly 3 a.m. at this point and nobody was around. Fine by me. About 20 minutes passed, when I heard a commotion near the bar area. Obviously I looked up from my phone, only to meet the eyes of this man of about 40, standing at the bar counter. This wasn't unusual. Oftentimes people would come down and grab some water or a smoke before heading back to bed. I thought nothing of it, and went back to doom scrolling on my phone. Sorry, excuse me. I let out a sigh, thinking to myself, what could this man possibly want from me at 3:30 a.m.? I stood up and asked if he was okay, and apologized for being on my phone, hoping he wouldn't complain to my manager in the morning. He responded, but I couldn't quite pick up what he was saying. I walked over to the bar and kindly asked him to repeat himself, apologizing for not hearing him. "Is it okay if I have some water?" He was shaking, almost nervous, soft-spoken, and honestly non-threatening, especially seeing as he was about 6 foot tall and I'm only 5 foot tall. "Of course," I said, and went to walk away when he stopped me. "I'm sorry. Is it okay if I talk to you for a while? My mum's dying in hospital, and I can't sleep." Looking back, I'm kicking myself for not making up some excuse about needing to do work, but I agreed to stay and talk with him. Stupid empathy. He asked if I smoked, and I did, so I said yes. Then he asked me to step outside to smoke and chat, to which I stupidly agreed. We spoke about his mum, and I tried my best to comfort him. I had just recently had someone pass away, so this topic of conversation hit particularly hard. He thanked me for being so kind and continued to talk about his life, how he used to be homeless, but he moved in with his sister and got back on his feet, and that they were both staying here due to the circumstances, but were not from this city. I listened and occasionally responded by nodding. It was a polite conversation, but then something changed. Are there cameras out here? I wouldn't want you to get in trouble for being out here." How this didn't register in my mind as a red flag is unbelievable. How gullible can you be? Anyway, thankfully I didn't respond with yes or no. I just assured him I wouldn't be in trouble for smoking outside. And yet he seemed disappointed with my answer. I presume because he didn't get any information about where the cameras were placed. The conversation kept getting weirder and creepier. None of this I realized. I just saw a sad man needing a friend. Eventually, some form of fight or flight activated in my brain. I told him I was cold and I was going in. "Come, let me give you a hug, it'll warm you up." What the hell? At this point I'm creeped out, but I'm thinking maybe he's just bad at picking up on social cues or something, so I respectfully declined and walked inside. He followed. He asked if he could grab a coffee and sit with me for a while, and me being me, and on the verge of a panic attack, and not wanting to get on this guy's bad side, I agreed. We sat there, and he continued to ask odd questions. Did I have kids? Did I want kids? If I had a boyfriend? I told him I had a fiancé, which was a lie, and he asked if I loved him. He went on to say, "I mean no harm in asking these questions. You're just so beautiful." At this point, my brain was screaming at me to get out of this situation. I had to think quickly. "Come and sit next to me. I won't bite." Hell no. I quickly made up the excuse that I had to get the area ready for the morning and that my manager would be showing up any minute. At the same time, my co-worker woke from his nap and passed by to get a coffee. That startled the man and he stood up before saying, "Tell your mum I was asking for her," forcing a hug, and left to go to his room. Oh my god. He was pretending to be a family friend so that my co-worker wouldn't be suspicious of him. I stood there in shock, not even able to speak. My brain was still trying to process what exactly the hell just happened. I kept quiet, helping my co-worker set up for the morning as it was now 5:30 a.m., and I was dealing with this man for 2 hours. I sat down at 5:30 and waited for my manager to show up so I could finally go home, hoping that man wouldn't come back before I had to leave. Wishful thinking. He showed up behind me out of nowhere. "I think I'll go to the shops. I'm out of smokes." Okay, why did I need to know this? I kept silent before he asked me for my pen, which I gave him, and he walked off again. He returned 5 minutes later and gave me back my pen. "I wrote a note for you." He stood so close to me and then dropped a piece of cardboard behind my back and walked away. In hindsight, I see how sneaky this was. He made sure no one could see him drop that note. I picked it up. It was pretty weird, but one line in particular made my skin crawl. "Wear tighter work pants for me next time. They look good." I ran into the office and sat in the front of the CCTV monitor, seeing exactly where he was. He was standing outside the building, waiting and pacing. Then he walked back into the building, and on camera, I could see he was looking for me. But thankfully at this point, I was in the office, so he walked back outside, started pacing again, and waiting, before hiding himself out of sight behind a corner. I told my manager, who told me to exit via the back entrance, which I did. I was shaking, checking behind me every few seconds, every noise making me run faster until I eventually reached the safety of my home. I sat down, processing what had just happened, when suddenly my phone vibrated. "Hey Anna, thanks for the chat. Talk soon." Winky face. How the hell did he get my number? I have never blocked someone faster in my life. I told the higher-ups what happened, and didn't return to work for at least a month, until he was permanently barred from my workplace. I still fear I'll see him somewhere and he'll be waiting for me. Thankfully, I haven't seen him since, and don't wish to, and I hope to never meet him again. I took on a house/pet sitting job for the weekend after my birthday. It was for a friend, and the dogs and cat are all super sweet, and I was happy to do it. I was already reeling from another scary encounter that had just happened to me on my birthday itself, so it was a welcome respite to have a mini vacation where I had a house to myself. It was the first night there. I'd come back from a family member's birthday party, and it was too early to curl my hair, so I was watching Ginny and Georgia on the living room TV. For reference, the TV was next to the front door, with the guest bathroom I was using within 3 feet. It was about 10 p.m, and I paused the show to pee. Dogs were asleep on the other side of the house, both older and one with mobility issues, and shortly after locking the door and sitting down, I heard something. At first, I thought I was being paranoid, as I've been through several break-ins and attempts, but then I heard the door open, and footsteps on the laminate flooring. And if you know how loud they are. Then I heard a man cough, distinctly, perhaps 15 feet from where I was. I frantically texted my mum to call the cops, thinking I should be as quiet as possible. But then when she didn't answer, I heard the footsteps coming closer. I panicked and called myself. Keep in mind, after my first situation, I became very particular. When I house sit, the first thing I do is check all the windows and doors and secure all entry points, as my dad taught me this growing up. I know everything was locked, but I'm sobbing on the phone and panicking on the toilet seat, hoping the cops get here in time and that I don't end up another statistic. Then I hear the footsteps recede and the back door close. The operator informed me the cops were there, but that I'd have to come out to let them in. I've got some really bad stories, but unlocking that door and running to the front door to unlock it and basically falling outside was up there for most terrifying moment of my life. They checked the house. They didn't believe me. The back door was not particularly secure, as it's the same kind I have in my bedroom at my place. It's the kind you can turn the lock and close behind you, so of course the place looked locked up. Once again, I slept with a knife under my pillow, and I slept for maybe 45 minutes that night. I don't know who the man was who wanted to try and burgle the house, but I hope I never meet you. At the time I was 13, my friend just turned 16. We are both female. Me and my friend Amy were both bored at home, and my dad was away from the house, leaving just us there. So we wanted to go shopping in this one shop I told her about. It was getting a bit late, like maybe about 7 p.m, but we figured it could still be open. However, this shop was quite far from the house, but I knew a shortcut. That being through the woods, taking that shortcut was my biggest mistake. We left the house, and it was still fairly bright outside. We were just walking and talking and went through the woods. There's rarely anyone there, apart from maybe some old man walking his dog, and I always used to go through those woods as a child, with my parents, and I always thought of it as being safe. We mindlessly walk until I notice a man with his hood up smoking. I whisper to Amy, "Hey, look," and she grabbed my arm just to be safe, and we both went around him so he wouldn't see us, but we are pretty sure he did. The sun begins to set and we reach the shop, only to realize it's closed, so we turn back the same way we came from. We completely forget about the encounter we had about 10 minutes ago, and we just laugh and talk. I look in front of us where we're walking, and we see someone. I'm 90% sure it was the same guy, and I freeze. Amy tracks where I'm looking, and she grabs my arm again, and we go off the trail to some place that I didn't recognize. We ran for a bit, then went back on the trail thinking we lost him. We look back. He's right behind us, sprinting full speed towards us. Amy, still clinging to my arm, begins running and pulling me with her. She asks me which way should we turn, while pointing towards the woods and then pointing to some area I didn't really know how to get back home from. Now it was dark out. Obviously we wouldn't go into the woods. Without thinking, we went towards the area I didn't really recognize. We keep running, keep looking back, and he's still there. We see some lady in the distance and we immediately rush to her. My throat was so sore I could barely breathe. This lady was on her phone, just standing there, and we tell her, "We're being chased, please can we stay with you for a while?" And this woman pays us no mind, as if this is normal. At least that was the last time we saw the man. Amy tries getting her phone out, but it's dead. I got mine, but I have no data, and can't go on Google Maps to find our way home. I knew the area we were in, I just wasn't sure how to get back home from there. I look around us and we begin to walk the way I thought was right. Finally, we walked until I recognized where we were, so I led the rest of the way, still paranoid that he would be behind us. We kept looking back. In order to get back home, we were forced to go the rest of the way through the woods. I thought this was a terrible idea, but at least I wasn't alone. After all, I saw her as a big sister, and don't know what would have happened if she wasn't there. We go through the woods. I pull out my phone flashlight because at this point it's pitch dark and I'm shaking, and Amy was also tense. We eventually made it back home safely, and we never told anyone this story. We weren't even supposed to leave the house, especially as it was getting dark. This experience stayed with us. Anyway, a few months after this happened, I was watching some YouTube documentary about true crime stuff. It was based in the exact same area that I got chased. Even the images used in the video were of the literal same street we got chased on. And it was about some kid that apparently murdered his whole family over a video game. Very graphic stuff. I told my mum about it and she told me, "Didn't you know that area is dangerous? It's probably the most dangerous part of town." And I was shocked. I never shared the story of what happened to Amy and I. But after that, I did. Though I don't think she took it very seriously. To this day, I still think to myself, what would have happened if we hadn't have reacted quicker? I'm glad we never got to find out, though. I'm a 21-year-old female. I usually try not to go to the laundromat at night, but with it getting dark so early, it's basically impossible. And that was the situation tonight. I got there and was alone except for one guy smoking outside and a couple of employees cleaning stuff. Usually I sit in my car while I wait, but it's super cold so that wasn't really an option. I brought along some homework and sat in one of the chairs. The chairs are arranged in groups of 2, so I put my backpack in the seat next to me. I could see this guy staring at me through the window. There were still employees around though, so I wasn't too worried. A while later, he came in and walked around for a while. Before deciding to approach me, he told me I was being rude, by taking up 2 chairs because what if he wanted to sit there? I basically told him there are other chairs and I could move to a different set if there was something special about these ones. He walked off and kept walking in circles around the building. A while later, the employees left. He came up to me again and pointed at my sweatshirt pocket and said, "You can keep that in your car, you know, you don't need it in here." What was in my pocket? Pepper spray. He was telling me to get rid of the pepper spray. I told him I didn't feel like it and would be keeping it. At this point, I was pretty eager to just get the hell out of there, and might have just gotten my car and pulled some laps around the block if it wasn't for the fact that the dryers don't lock, and I was paranoid about him going through my stuff. Luckily, he decided to go smoke again, and I escaped while he was gone. This happened to me in about 2021. There's a small bar in a small Iowa town that I absolutely adore. All the staff knew me well, and I was a frequent regular, even if I was just there to chill. I was out late one night. The tap water is bad, so I refused to drink it. If I wasn't going to drink it, I refused to give it to my cat. There's a water fountain at the park where the water is much more drinkable, so I saved some core water bottles from when I was buying normal water from the gas station and started my walk to collect water. I had to pass the bar to get there. It was a Friday night, and the bar was bumping. I just had to go in again. There were some men who were there basically all the time. They were there that night. After the bar closed, I made my way to the park to collect the water. They had left before I did. The park was across the street and a block down to the right. The 3 of them were sitting and smoking, super drunk. They drank beer like it was water. They were sitting on some stairs on the entrance to a business directly across the street. I went to pass them and they asked, "Who are you? Are you new in town?" I didn't think much of it. It's a super small Iowa town and everyone knew everyone. I told them yes, I was in fact new in town. And they started asking personal questions, and I lied to them about everything I said. Mainly about if I had a partner, because they found me attractive. In the middle of this conversation, there was a screaming cat somewhere. It was so loud. I ended the convo and told them I really needed to go and get home to my cat, so I went into the park to get the water. It was pushing 4 AM at this point and it was dark. The street lights were a soft, ambient, warm orange, and there's little to no light pollution. You can barely see anything. While I was getting the water, I looked across the street and saw one of the men duck down behind a parked car like they tried to go inside of it. The car never made a noise or flash to indicate someone entered. I noted this, but didn't think too much of it. They're drunk and probably being weird. I left the park, and suddenly another one of the guys was sitting alone closer to me, away from the other 2, sitting on a different set of stairs. He tried to make conversation again, but I kept walking. I again noted this, but still didn't think much of it. I didn't know where the 3rd man was. Suddenly, the night shift cop I was acquainted to pulled up to me and asked if I was screaming for help and if the men were bothering me. I wasn't putting 2 and 2 together and told him no, but the screaming was just a cat. Several people called in that someone was screaming, but the cops were everywhere. He carried on and said to call him if I needed anything. I kept walking home. I crossed the street and slipped straight into pitch black darkness once I was back into a residential area. That was when I heard someone behind me go, "Psst." I turn around and it's the same guy by the car, doing the same thing as before. There was a 3rd guy on the other side of the street. I walked faster. Then I heard someone clicking like they were calling a dog. It was the car guy. Then I saw the other man in the middle of the road going, "Psst." They started to walk faster towards me. It finally clicked. I bolted and took a different route, hiding in the dark and waiting for a while before running home. I never saw them again after that, which is abnormal. I also asked the bartender if they ever acted like that, and she said they hadn't. I don't know why they never came back to the bar. Maybe they did, after I moved again or something. Glad I never had to find out, though. I work full-time at a public university in the US as an office manager, and I'm enrolled into grad school at the same institution. I graduated this May. I have in-person night classes 3 days a week that start right after I get off work. My apartment is on the first floor of a complex about 10 minutes away. Over the past few months, I've had numerous bizarre occurrences around my home and workplace. The first, to my knowledge, was in September, and was something my neighbor across the hall, a very sweet older woman, told me. A man was banging on my door for around an hour just after midnight. I wasn't home. My neighbor poked her head out to ask him what was going on, and he said he was a DoorDasher with no food or bags in his hand. My neighbor watched him through the peephole and told me he tried the doorknob multiple times. As far as I know, he didn't come back, but I've also had 3 or 4 instances over this several-month period where someone knocked on my bedroom window, which have blackout curtains and are always closed, late at night, loud enough to wake me and my tiny dog, but I never saw who. A woman came to my sliding glass door about a month later, demanding to come in because her stolen device had apparently pinged in my apartment. When I refused, she called the sheriff's department. The deputy came, asked me a few questions and left, but did confirm the device was pinging my apartment. Never found out if she meant a phone or what. The woman hung out in the parking lot before leaving a few minutes later. Obviously, I've never stolen any phone, so I was completely bewildered, and I never saw her again. In December, things came to a head when I found a plug-in GPS tracker in the OBD port under my dashboard. Car dealership where I got serviced last said they didn't use that brand, Land Air C, and yes, I have the model and serial number, and didn't perform any services that would have warranted putting it there. I called the cops, and they just wrote down a few details and left. University police were also informed since the tracker was probably placed either on campus or at my apartment. The tracker was the biggest red flag. I never checked my OBD port, so I have no idea how long it was there. I told my unit director, and he offered to subtly remove mentions of me around the office and the website, which I accepted. However, I was posted up at the office front desk for 80% of my day. This past Tuesday, right before I left for lunch, a middle-aged man came into the office wearing a hairnet, surgical mask, hoodie and sunglasses. He claimed to be a prospective student and had questions about FAFSA. He was extremely hard to understand. I directed him to the financial aid office across campus, and he kept asking questions that our office could not answer. I thought, sure, fine, maybe harmless, but just not all there mentally. He walks over to our coffee machine and just starts making himself coffee. He's still there when I leave, and one of my staff watches the desk while I'm out. When I return from lunch, he's gone, but walks in after me a few minutes later and just sits in the lobby on his phone before getting up to leave almost immediately. I was off work Wednesday and Thursday and came in on Friday. I felt like giving my mostly undergrad staff a break, so gave them permission to head home early, inadvertently leaving me alone in the office. The man came back wearing the exact same clothes, mask, hairnet, sunglasses within 5 minutes of the office clearing out. Our office is technically open to the public, but isn't really public facing, and he had no reason for being there, especially that late in the day. He came in, barely acknowledged me, and said he was going to bring back bottled water for our coffee machine and left again. I'm very creeped out by this, so I messaged my director, and he got an IT guy from the adjacent building to come over with his laptop to keep me company. I explained the situation, and he said he'd stay with me till close. He settled in my director's office just around the corner, but it still looked like I was alone. The man returns, without water, and leans against the desk trying to start a conversation with me. An IT guy comes around the corner and stands between me and him, and he quickly changes the subject and asks about financial aid again, for the 4th time in many days, before being directed away and leaving immediately. I'm strongly considering informing campus police about this. Like I said, they already knew about the tracker. I've had problems in the past during my undergrad years, and a different institution with men and women being creepy towards me, but nothing to this level, and I don't know what to do. Any advice on what I should do or change would be appreciated. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this, you will enjoy the free stories I've got over on Patreon dropping tomorrow for free, a collection of Let's Not Meet stories. So if that interests you, hopefully I'll see you over there tomorrow. And I'll be back on Sunday for some middle of nowhere scary stories. I'd like to give one big thank you to my members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen. Your support really does go a hell of a long way, so thank you. But for now, stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one. Good night.